Chapter 388. There was a moment of silence in the forest. Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at Tianlan. After a while Tianlan said, "Didn't you ask little Ma about this before you came?" Lu Chen said, "I did, but old Ma didn't tell me much. He only said a few words and didn't want to say more. I think he was afraid that I would find out something and get angry. Maybe he wouldn't come to Immortal City and would run to Kunlun Mountain out of anger." Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a while, then he laughed and said, "It's funny, but thinking about little Ma it might really be possible." Lu Chen smiled and said, "That's why I thought I'd come and ask you myself." Tianlan nodded and said, "Su Qingjun is a good girl. Back then, that incident caused a storm in the city. There were people in the Su family and Kunlun sect who blamed and criticized her. She didn't defend herself and just took it. In the past few years, she only focused on cultivation and made great progress. If there are no accidents, it shouldn't be a problem for her to easily reach the Yuanying realm." Lu Chen was silent for a while and then said, "It seems that she is not far from the truth to be able to get such a comment from you, a perfected lord of soul formation." Tianlan smiled and didn't say anything. His expression was calm as if what he said just now was a matter of course and had unshakable confidence. "From what you said just now, the Su family seems to have a big reaction?" Lu Chen asked again. "Of course." Tianlan snorted and said, "Back then, you went crazy and directly rushed into their mansion and killed Sumo in front of so many people. How do you think the Su family will react?" Lu Chen said expressionlessly, "I didn't kill wrongly and I don't regret it." Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand casually and said after a while, "Yes, you're right. The Su family was so angry that they wanted to get to the bottom of this. After you escaped, the Su family was not willing to let you go. They went back to the faction to investigate you. Not only did they want to investigate your background, but they also wanted to find out how you entered the Kunlun party. They wanted to get to the bottom of it. They probably wanted to find your relatives and family by following the vines." Hearing this, Lu Chen's expression became strange. Even though he never liked the Su family, the only exception was probably Su Qingjun. However, upon hearing Perfected Lord Tianlan's words, Lu Chen still had an indescribable sense of absurdity. How did he join the Kunlun party? It was arranged by Perfected Lord Tianlan. What background does he have? Does he have a backer? Of course, the most powerful deity in the Kunlun sect was his backer. In the eyes of those who knew the inside story, the Su family's aggressive investigation was really a bit suicidal. "Then how did you stop them from investigating?" Lu Chen asked. "Was it troublesome?" Tianlan snorted and said, "Of course it was troublesome. You're the only one who knows how to make trouble. But it's just like that. I just made some arrangements so that they couldn't investigate further." "Then what did you do to the Su family?" Lu Chen looked at Tianlan with an inquiring look in his eyes. Tianlan said, "I didn't do anything to them. I've been reorganizing the faction these years and didn't want to get involved. But old Ma told me about the grievances you suffered in the Su family. I just wanted to wait for you to come back and see what you think." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "Is it important what I think? How you deal with the Su family depends on me." Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, "Well, it's up to you. No matter what, you're mine. Since you suffered in their hands, it's only right for me to take revenge." The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched and he lowered his head slightly. After a moment he said calmly, "Forget it. The only one in the Su family who really hated me was Sumo, and he was killed by me. The others didn't have much to do with me, but Su Qingjun had a good relationship with me in that year. Let's stop this matter." Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said, "Let's stop here." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, let's stop here. Don't get others involved." "Okay. You said you had a few things to ask me. What about the other things?" Tianlan asked. Lu Chen didn't know why, but when he looked at this fat and burly man, his original mood suddenly became a little bleak. He couldn't lift his spirits and felt more helpless. He was silent for a long time and then said with a wry smile, "Forget it. I suddenly don't want to talk about other things." Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and didn't get angry at Lu Chen's words. It seemed that this high-ranking Perfected Lord of Huashan Realm did have a whole new level of respect for the young man in front of him. He even seemed to know Lu Chen very well and was particularly tolerant of Lu Chen. He even said a few more words to Lu Chen. By the way, I also know about Exan. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly and he looked up. Tianlan said, the girl's body was taken back by her family and given a proper burial. I also asked the Kunlun sect to put in some effort to arrange a grand funeral for her. Let's just take it as us making it up to her a little. Lu Chen took a deep breath and then slowly stood up and said, when Exan was alive, she didn't seem to like this kind of thing very much. But I know her intention, and I think Exan's parents can also feel it. I thank you on behalf of that unfortunate girl. After saying that, he straightened his expression and solemnly bowed to Perfected Lord Tianlan and then said, if Exan knows in the underworld, she will definitely want me to thank you on her behalf. Perfected Lord Tianlan calmly accepted the bow. When Lu Chen straightened up again he said, whether you still want to ask or not, since I'm here tonight, I naturally want to have a good talk with you. If you've said everything you want to know and know everything you want to know, then it's my turn to say it now, right? Lu Chen nodded and said, go ahead. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, come back and help me. Lu Chen paused for a moment and then said with a wry smile, with your power and strength, what kind of talent can't you find? Why do you insist on me coming back? Perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly, there are many people who want to help me, but I can't think of anyone else who is worthy of my complete trust and can be entrusted with such important matters by me. Lu Chen coughed and said, I've been listening to this kind of flattery for 10 years. I've long known that it's just a big empty pie in the sky. Don't lie to me. Perfected Lord Tianlan said with a smile, I'm not lying to you. I'm telling the truth. Lu Chen shook his head and said, I heard from old Ma that you've recently transferred many young experts from the Kunlun party over, and half of them have joined Fuyunji. These people are of the same lineage as you, so you can trust them in everything they do. Tianlan said, those people are passable, but I still can't trust them completely. And this time, there's one thing I still only trust in you. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, a bitter expression appeared on his face and he said, the devil cult again? Yes, Tianlan said. It's the devil cult again. It has to be you. Bull **T. Lu Chen scolded, last time in Kunlun Mountain, you also said the same thing to me. In the end, there were only a few people from the devil cult on Kunlun Mountain. Instead, it was your two perfected lords and several major factions that were fighting among themselves. I'm not going to join in the fun. Chapter 389. Perfected Lord Tianlan paused for a moment and suddenly looked a little embarrassed, but he soon recovered and said to Lu Chen with a smile, that was an accident. You know what an accident means, right? Originally, I asked you to go there to track down the spy in the Kunlun party, but then an opportunity suddenly appeared for me to reorganize the Kunlun party. Do you think I should do it or not? Lu Chen sneered and said, after saying so much, where is the spy of the devil cult? Have you found him or not? Not yet. Perfected Lord Tianlan answered honestly. Indeed, I haven't found him yet. Actually, if you didn't cause so much trouble, such as directly rushing to the Su family to kill people, I still want you to continue to go back to Kunlun Mountain to help me find him. TSK. This time, Lu Chen didn't even bother to say anything and directly rolled his eyes at him. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and said, let's forget about these things. It's all in the past after all. What's your plan now? The corner of Lu Chen's eye twitched and he said, just don't bother me. I'll find a place to eat and wait for my death. It's very comfortable. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, that's too much of a pity. Others can't learn your skills at all. Lu Chen sneered and said, what's there to pity? This deadly skill, whoever wants it can take it. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and looked at Lu Chen very gently, like a father looking at a naughty child. After a while he said, don't be anxious, listen to me. Lu Chen shrugged and sat down on the ground indifferently. Although his expression was as usual, it was not that he didn't have those complicated emotions in his heart. In fact, sometimes, even he himself did not quite understand how he felt when facing this damned baldy who had raised him since he was young and taught him all of his skills. Respect, worship, resentment, anger, trust, or doubt. There seemed to be something in every kind of feeling. When he followed old Ma to the immortal city from King Shutang village this time, before he really saw Tianlan, Lu Chen was actually a little nervous and perturbed. Because until today, he still couldn't see and understand this damn baldy clearly. Is he good or bad? Did he really believe her, or was he just using her with his flowery words? Lu Chen felt that these matters were shrouded in clouds and mist, and he couldn't see through them clearly. I really believe you. Perfected Lord Tianlan's calm voice came from the darkness ahead. There was no fluctuation of emotion, as if what he said was the most natural thing in the world. In the past few decades, I founded the Fuyun Agency and gathered many talents to do the most important thing, which is to deal with the devil cult. But the demons of the devil cult are too cunning. After they can't beat us, they hide in the dark and play all kinds of tricks. Even now, a lot of them have infiltrated into Zhengxian Meng. It's very troublesome. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, I heard from old Ma that even your subordinates in Fuyunji have caught a few devil cult spies. Perfected Lord Tianlan sneered and said, Isn't that so? Even the organization I specially set up to deal with the devil cult has been infiltrated by the demons of the devil cult. That's why I said that the idiots of Zhengxian Meng have cultivated too much that even their brains have been damaged. Nowadays, the devil cult only looks weak on the surface, but it is everywhere in the dark and has far-reaching influence. Maybe its real strength is far beyond our imagination. If we don't attack it, I'm afraid a big disaster is right in front of us. Lu Chen was silent. Tianlan glanced at him and said, I've said something similar to you before. Today, I might as well say it to you again. In dealing with the devil cult, I really only trust you. Because everyone in the world may be a spy of the devil cult, but only you are not. Come back and help me. Tianlan said slowly, word by word. Lu Chen sat in the dark, quiet and silent. At this time, it was already late at night and there was almost no light in the woods. Their figures had long been integrated into the surrounding darkness. He couldn't see Tianlan clearly and didn't know if Tianlan could really see him clearly. I still don't really want to do it. After a long time, Lu Chen broke the silence and said, I always have a feeling that I've been doing the same thing all my life, and it seems that this thing can never be finished. I'm a little annoyed. Tianlan nodded slightly in the dark. After a while he said, Then what do you want to do? Lu Chen said, I've said it before. Find a place to eat and wait for death. Well, I've worked hard for you for more than 10 years. In exchange for the rest of my life, it's not too much, right? Tianlan seemed to be amused by his words. He chuckled and then sighed saying, It's not too much, not too much. For some reason, the more they talked face to face like this, the calmer Lu Chen felt. Although he had not completely abandoned the suspicion he once had, it had gradually weakened a lot. This person he had watched grow up, the person he once saw as a father, this tall and burly figure. Perhaps his position in his heart was even greater and more deep-rooted than he had imagined. Of course you can choose to hide and eat and wait for death. I won't force you, nor will I break my promise. Lord Tianlan said lightly in the dark, but I think you should also know that some things can't be done as you like. You're still young, and your cultivation and talent are not bad. In the future, you'll probably live longer than me. But once I die, or when the devil cult strength suddenly rises again, as long as they seize the place of Fuyunji, they can find a lot of things. At that time, it won't be difficult to find your hiding place. Lu Chen snorted coldly but didn't say anything. Tianlan looked at him and said, As long as the devil cult is not destroyed, even if you hide, you won't feel at ease. I'm telling the truth. Destroy, destroy, destroy. You only know how to destroy the devil cult. Lu Chen suddenly became a little angry and said to Tianlan with a trace of anger, It's been more than 10 or 20 years, and you still say the same thing. But how to destroy it? During the Battle of the Barren Valley, we've done so much, but the devil cult still hasn't been destroyed. After so many years, it's still like a ghost. You also said that there's a secret in Kunlun Mountain, but we've searched around and still found nothing. Then tell me, what should I do to completely get rid of this disgusting and ferocious devil cult? Tianlan was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he smiled and said in a gentle voice, Why, it seems that you're very annoyed by this matter? Nonsense, I've been pestered by this matter for more than 10 or 20 years, and I've been worried about dying a violent death every day. Who wouldn't be annoyed? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, You're right. Actually, I've thought about all of these before. Recently, I've suddenly realized something. We definitely have to destroy the devil cult. However, the direction that we've been taking in the past might not be right. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, What do you mean? Perfected Lord Tianlon said. Previously, we always wanted to get rid of those important figures in the devil cult, thinking that we can destroy the devil cult by killing all of these ambitious demons. But the truth shows that this method is not effective. The demons of the devil cult are always like weeds, popping up in waves. But later, I suddenly thought of a key point that might be able to destroy the devil cult once and for all. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlon and said after a while, "Is there really such a way?" "Yes." "What is it?" Tianlon smiled in the darkness. The darkness shrouded him, making his tall figure look like a devil in the darkness, terrifying and terrifying. "The divine tree." After saying that, Perfected Lord Tianlon became indifferent again and said, "That thing has been the source of the devil cult's belief for thousands of years. As long as we find a way to destroy it, the devil cult will naturally collapse, right?" Lu Chen suddenly fell into silence and did not say a word for a long time. Chapter 390. What do you think? Tianlon asked, probably seeing that Lu Chen did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "I thought the tree of God of the devil cult is the same as the gods in other myths and legends. They are all illusory things that do not exist in the world." Tianlon smiled and said, "In the legends of the devil cult, the real tree of God is a divine object that has existed since the beginning of the world. Not only is it indomitable, but it can also cross the heavens and the earth and give birth to all things. It is the origin of all living things in the world. You should have heard of these myths in the devil cult, right?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, this is the fundamental belief of the devil cult demons. Of course I know about it. However, in the devil cult, there is always a part that cannot be justified. That is, from the beginning to the end, from the birth of the devil cult until now, no one has really seen the appearance of the tree of God in this world. There are only extravagant myths that can only deceive those who have no brains." A glimmer of light flashed across Tianlon's eyes. He looked at Lu Chen and asked with a smile, "You don't believe it?" Lu Chen said, "I don't believe it." Lord Tianlon nodded and seemed to be quite satisfied with Lu Chen's attitude. He then said, "This thing is naturally insignificant to us, but for the demons of the devil cult, it is a very important matter. In addition, I heard that in the devil cult, there is the so-called branch, leaf, seed. Do you know about it?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly jumped, but he looked as usual. After thinking for a moment he said, "It is probably the one branch, two leaves, one seed that they say?" The people of the devil cult said that these four treasures are the remains of the tree of God left in this world. At the same time, there is another saying that as long as these four divine objects are gathered and the secret method passed down from the devil cult era is used to perform the summoning ceremony, the door of Void Realm can be opened and the tree of God will be summoned back to this world. "Ridiculous!" Perfected Lord Tianlon sneered with a disdainful look on his face, and said, "This statement sounds very far-fetched. Even if it's true, those idiots in the devil cult don't think about it. How can something that can break the void and enter this world through summoning be a deity that can bring them eternal life and power? I think it's more likely to be a catastrophe." Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything, but judging from his expression, he obviously had no objection to Lord Tianlon's words. After sneering, Lord Tianlon asked Lu Chen, "By the way, have you seen these four objects before?" Lu Chen sat upright on the ground, like a shadow blending into the surrounding darkness. His face could not be seen clearly. After a while he said calmly, "I have never seen these four divine objects in the evil faction. Back then, I also asked Yun Shouyang about this, and he said that this myth and legend has been passed down for thousands of years. Until now it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. However, these four treasures do exist, but it seems that not all of them are in the hands of the evil faction demons. A few of them have already been lost in the world. Until now there is no hope of finding them." "Yes." Lord Tianlon nodded and said, "What you said is similar to what I know. It is basically like this." Lu Chen raised his head slightly and looked at him. He said, "Then what do you plan to do now? And what do you mean by destroying the tree of God?" Lord Tianlon said, "Actually, after I thought of this, I have already secretly made some arrangements. Of course, it is still early. Roughly speaking, we'll first find one or a few of the four divine objects, branch, leaf and seed, and then we'll use these to find the others." Lu Chen suddenly raised his voice as if he was a little surprised. He interrupted and asked, "If you find one divine object, you can find other divine objects through it?" Perfected Lord Tianlon smiled and touched his bald head with his hand. Then he said, I do have some ideas. We can give it a try. You know, when one's cultivation realm reaches my level, he will always think of or understand some strange divine powers. It just so happens that I have a divine power that can divine the whereabouts of other things through the same species. Of course, this divine power is actually not so effective every time, especially for these things that are related to the legendary divine objects. The mysteries of heaven are even more mysterious and it is easy to make a mistake. But it is still a method after all. Lu Chen paused for a moment and said, That's amazing. How confident are you? Lord Tianlon laughed and said, About 70% to 80%. Lu Chen's pupils suddenly constricted. Fortunately, he could not see clearly in the darkness. After a while he said in a low voice, This should be very confident. Lord Tianlon smiled and said, That is why I want you to come and help me to see if you can find those branches, leaves and seeds. Just as Lu Chen was about to speak, Perfected Lord Tianlon waved his hand slightly and stopped him. I roughly know what you want to say. However, I still think that you're the most suitable person for this matter. After all, it's something that's closely related to the devil cult. No one is more familiar with the devil cult than you. How about helping me one more time? He stared at Lu Chen and said, Let's completely eliminate this evil scourge that has been harming the world for thousands of years, okay? Lu Chen took a deep breath, and just when he was about to speak, he suddenly hesitated. He felt waves of coldness appear on his forehead and back, and he suddenly realized to his shock that he was actually drenched in sweat unknowingly, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly nodded heavily and said in a deep voice, Okay, I will help you with this. I was right about you. Perfected Lord Tianlon walked to Lu Chen's side with a gratified expression and patted the latter's shoulder gently. I knew that you wouldn't disappoint me. Perfected Lord Tianlon said in a joyful tone. Lu Chen snorted and said, You won't make me work for nothing again this time, right? Lord Tianlon was stunned for a moment and said, When did I make you work for nothing? I don't think so. That time on the Kunlun Mountain, Lu Chen said indifferently. You called me over and made a bunch of extravagant promises, but you have not fulfilled any of them until now. A trace of embarrassment flashed across Lord Tianlon's old face. Then he smiled bitterly and said, I'm indeed in the wrong for this matter. I'm sorry, but you should also understand that there are things that I can't do either. Back then on the night of the full moon, you suddenly rushed to the Su family at the foot of the mountain and killed them. Then, you immediately escaped and attracted the attention of both the Orthodox and the demon sections. Under such circumstances, I was the new sect leader and needed to reorganize the major forces in the Kunlun party. I really couldn't stand up for you. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, I know. That's why I came back to see you this time. I'll help you with this matter again, but I also want to know how you'll arrange things for me if this matter is done well. At least, I'll have something to worry about. Lord Tianlon stared at Lu Chen for a long time and suddenly nodded. You're right. Actually, even if things don't go well for you this time, it's just bad luck and I won't blame you. What I want to tell you is that no matter what, I'll fulfill my promise after this matter is over. As he said that, he suddenly reached out and grabbed one of Lu Chen's palms before stuffing something into his palm. Based on the feeling of the skin on his palm, Lu Chen instinctively felt that it seemed to be a square metal plate. It was hard and a little cold, and its edges were smooth and round. However, the center of the plate was uneven and seemed to be engraved with a word. He rubbed it for a moment and suddenly frowned. Looking at Lord Tianlon, he asked in surprise, What's this? It's the word Tian? One day, you'll inherit this Taoist name from me. Right now, Perfected Lord Tianlon's unusually tall and burly body seemed like a tall mountain in the darkness. Even his voice seemed to carry a trace of an ancient aura. Lu Chen, keep it well. This is something that I should have given to you more than 10 years ago. Chapter 391. Something that should have been given more than 10 years ago? What was the meaning of this so-called heavenly token? Everything seemed to be possible to guess, but Perfected Lord Tianlon did not continue to explain to Lu Chen, and Lu Chen did not ask further. He just slowly clenched the token in his hand and did not say a word in the darkness. No one could see the expression on his face at the moment, so no one could guess his current mood. The night wind swept past the treetops, making rustling sounds and adding a bit of silence to the world. No one else knew the content of this conversation in the forest in the middle of the night, including old Ma, who had been staying outside the small forest from the beginning to the end. He was a bit bored, but in fact, he was also a bit worried. He would look at the forest from time to time, but he never had the intention to go in. Until he saw Atsu walking out of the darkness in the forest in the night, and then Lu Chen's figure also appeared in his sight. Old Ma immediately went to greet them. When he was about to say something, he suddenly turned his head and looked to the side. Then, with a slightly surprised expression, he asked Lu Chen, "Where is perfected Lord Tianlan?" "He went back first." Lu Chen said, "He said that he has something to deal with and has to rush back, so he won't come to see you again. He asked me to tell you on his behalf." Old Ma nodded. He naturally did not dare to be dissatisfied with perfected Lord Tianlan. He said, "His Excellency is very busy every day, so of course he is very busy. It doesn't matter. By the way, how did your conversation go?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "It went well, but he asked me to stay here in Immortal City to help him." Old Ma immediately looked happy. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said with a smile, "That's good. Immortal City is the most prosperous place in the world, and you have a perfected Lord of Soul Formation as your backer. If you stay here and work, your life will be too easy." "He still wants me to help him deal with the devil cult," Lu Chen said. Old Ma paused for a moment, his brows slightly wrinkled. After a moment, he slowed down his speech, as if he was thinking, said, "If that is the case, then it is hard to say. After all, the evil faction side is full of lunatics. But, this seems to be what you have been doing all your life. At least you are much better than others." Lu Chen smiled bitterly and looked at Old Ma helplessly. "You also know that this is the only thing I've done in my life?" Old Ma shrugged, and then he said, "Have you thought it through? Let me know if you've made a decision. I'll return to the Immortal City to see the Lord first, and then I'll arrange everything." Lu Chen opened his mouth to say something, but he suddenly held back. He placed his hand on his chest and pressed lightly. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "All right, then go and ask them what they want us to do." "All right." When the morning sun shone down from the horizon, Lu Chen was still lying on the ground in the forest, his head resting on the soft fur of Atsu. As the sun gradually rose, the light and shadow in the forest kept changing, shifting. There was a kind of strange and breathtaking beauty. Lu Chen woke up in the morning light, but did not get up. He only looked at the light and shadow crisscrossing, changing strange scene. Occasionally he would reach out and touch his chest. Under his clothes, there was already a tag hanging on his chest, and there was still a trace of faintly discernible cool air coming from it. He waited until noon before he saw Old Ma return, looking at his hurried footsteps, but his expression was considered normal. Lu Chen then slowly sat up, smiled at Old Ma and said, "You've worked hard, how's the matter?" Old Ma sat down in front of him, and did not talk nonsense with Lu Chen. He said straightforwardly, "We don't need to fight and kill this time. The most important task is to find the evil sect's legendary branch, leaf and seed." Lu Chen nodded his head and said, "How do we find it? At least when I was in the evil sect, I didn't really see these divine objects. Now we have to rely on the two of us to look for it blindly?" After a pause, Lu Chen said, "If that's really the case, I think the two of us should go back to Qingshitang village. At least it might be a little safer there." Old Ma laughed and said, "Don't worry, although it's very difficult to find these things. Perfected Immortal has already told me that the most important thing about these divine objects of the same origin is that they are intertwined with each other's fate energy. As long as one of them is found, someone will use other secret techniques to deduce the approximate location of the other divine objects." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "There's actually such a powerful supernatural power?" "Who knows?" Old Ma smiled and said, "Anyway, it's all the supernatural power of perfected immortals. It's not strange that we mortals can't compare." Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, "Even so, the world is so big, it's really too difficult to find the 4 treasures that have no clues at all." Before he finished speaking, Old Ma interrupted, "Don't be afraid, Perfected Immortal has already told me very clearly this morning. Now in this immortal city, including the land within 100 miles, there's a hidden divine object. We just need to think of a way to find it." Lu Chen's expression changed and instantly became a little serious. He looked at Old Ma and said, "Where did this news come from?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I also heard it from Perfected Immortal, Of course I don't know the specific source of the news, and it's not convenient for me to ask. Old Ma was telling the truth. Lu Chen nodded slowly, but a trace of uneasiness flashed across his heart. No one knew better than him that at this moment, there was a seed of the sacred tree sealed in his body, and it was also very likely that this treasure was one of the 4 divine objects that he and Old Ma had mentioned before. He originally thought that as long as he strictly guarded against this secret would never be known by others. But now it seemed that there was someone else who might know this secret? Or was it just a pure coincidence? He lowered his head and pondered for a long time without saying a word, but Old Ma, who was standing at the side, came over and patted his shoulder and said with a smile, "Don't think too much. Anyway, in the end, isn't it just a battle of wits and courage with the demons of the devil cult? We've been doing this for so many years. What's there to be afraid of?" Lu Chen grunted and nodded. Old Ma smiled and said, "Since you also understand this, then let's go. Right now, let's go to the Immortal City and find an inn to stay for a couple of days to rest. In the future, should we also make a disguise to avoid being discovered by others?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "What do you want to do?" Old Ma coughed and said, "How about the 2 of us cooperate to open a shop?" "Forget it." Lu Chen bluntly pointed at his heart and said, "When you do business, it's always a losing business. Every shop you open collapses. You've never made money and you've even subsidized it every time. If you go to open a shop in the Immortal City, I'm afraid you'll be suppressed by others in 8 to 10 days. Old Ma grunted, but with an arrogant look on his face he said, "What do you know? We have a backer behind us. If we encounter any trouble, we can just look for the Lord to solve it. And what's more, it's actually just a kind of speculation. As for the actual situation, Lord Immortal also said that he might not be 100% sure." Lu Chen grunted again, feeling that there was no need for him to be entangled on this issue, so he deliberately changed the topic and said, "This time, was it also you and I who directly contacted the dam Baldy?" "That's not it." A burst of laughter as clear as a wind chime came from outside the forest. Chapter 392. Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other, then turned to look together. At noon, when the sun shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, a slender and beautiful figure walked in from outside the forest. It was a beautiful and mature woman. She had a smile on her face, charming and gentle. She even waved at Lu Chen, then said with a smile, "Lord True Monarch, firstly, he has too many things to deal with every day. Most of the time, he is really too busy. Secondly, he has too big of a target. Even though his Tao is profound and powerful, he really attracts too much attention. If it was somewhere else, it would be fine. But in this immortal city with countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers, it is very easy to attract the attention of other forces." She smiled and said to Lu Chen and Old Ma, "You guys don't want this to happen, do you?" Lu Chen stared at this woman, his brows slightly furrowed. After a moment, he said in a deep voice, "Shuang? Hall Leader Shui?" "That's me." The woman nodded with a smile and said, "I am Shuang, the hall leader of the Fuyunji you guys were in before. You can say that I am temporarily helping Lord True Monarch to look after you." Lu Chen's expression became more serious. No matter who it was, as long as they were below the level of Divine Monarch, when facing this woman, whether they were friend or foe, almost all of them would involuntarily feel a kind of reverence mixed with complex emotions. Fuyunji was an organization founded by Lord Tianlan many years ago. It was affiliated with Zhengxian Meng. Influenced by the founder, for many years, Fuyunji had always been one of the most fierce organizations in the righteous path against the devil sect. Every year, both sides had to pay a high price for this kind of hatred. And Shuang had also become one of the few enemies of the devil sect who had a blood feud with Lord Tianlan. For the past few years, the true immortal alliance had been growing stronger day by day, the evil sect had been weakening, and there was almost no stronger external enemy. The world had been peaceful for a long time. For a very long time, there had not been any overly intense and bloody battle. However, even under such circumstances, Shuang still became the hall master of the true immortal alliance whose hands were stained with the most blood and lives. It could be said that she was the most eye-catching. In recent years, the devil cult had been on the wane. Although there were often news of devil cult followers in other parts of the Divine Land, but looking at the overall situation, the once powerful devil cult began to go downhill after the crucial battle of the Desolate Valley in the Land of Chaos more than 10 years ago. Lu Chen's original identity was actually a shadow in Fuyunji. But he was a rather special existence. After lurking in the Devil's Sect for so many years, there was only one person in the outside world who could directly contact him, and that was Old Ma. And on the surface, Old Ma was just an ordinary member of Fuyunji, but in private, he would directly report to Lord Tianlan about the matter of Lu Chen. And because of this, in the past, Lu Chen did not fawn over this beautiful hall leader like most of the Fuyunji shadows, and Xueying did not seem to understand them. But this situation seemed to have changed today. In the future, if you are in the Immortal City, you can temporarily be considered as one of my subordinates. If there is anything, I will help you ask Lord Tianlan. What do you think? Xueying said very politely, as if they were old friends for many years, discussing with Lu Chen and Old Ma. Lu Chen smiled, nodded and said, "Okay." Xueying laughed, clapped her hands and said, "Then it's settled. You and Old Ma can find a place to rest for the next 2 days. Then I will arrange for you to find a business in the Immortal City as a cover. Things can be carried out slowly. There is no hurry." Speaking up to here, she paused, then smiled and said, "In addition, there is one more thing I want to tell you. Lord Tianlan has already discussed this matter in depth with me, and I know the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Because there are too many mountains in this Immortal City, there are many eyes spying on us both in the open and in the dark, so it is indeed not very convenient for Lord Tianlan. So in the future, the two of you better not look for him directly. If there is anything, tell me, okay?" Old Ma frowned slightly and turned to look at Lu Chen, only to find that the other was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other in the air for a moment, then turned away. After a while, Old Ma laughed and cupped his hands to Xueying. "Hallmaster Xue is right. Then in the future, we brothers will have to ask Hallmaster to take care of us. You are too polite." Xueying's attitude had always been very gentle and polite, but for some reason, there seemed to be an indistinct sense of distance between them. Moreover, when facing the two of them, she seemed to treat them differently. Intentionally or unintentionally, she placed more of her attention on the quiet Lu Chen. It was also at this time that Lu Chen opened his mouth and said to Xueying, "Hallmaster Xue, there is something that I need your help with." Xueying nodded and said, "Go ahead." Lu Chen pointed at Atsu lying on the side and said, "This dog has been with me for many years. Can it follow me into the city?" Xueying glanced at the huge figure of Atsu and was obviously startled. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed and then said, "This might be a bit troublesome. Recently in the city. You should know about the dog prohibition order, right?" As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Lu Chen and Old Ma. Lu Chen and Old Ma both nodded. Lu Chen then said, "I know about that. Old Ma also told me before to let it loose in the mountains around the Immortal City for a period of time. However, this is the Immortal City, not an ordinary place. There are countless experts in the open and in the dark. I am not at ease." Xueying was obviously still a bit hesitant. After pondering for a moment, she said, "This black dog is too big of a target. It is too eye-catching. If you keep it by your side and one day it runs out onto the street, I am afraid that in the blink of an eye, you will be in danger of being exposed." Lu Chen interrupted, "Then if we only stay in our residence and don't go out, is that okay?" Xueying thought for a moment and said, "That should be much better. However, the two of you used to be in this line of work. If there is a mistake, the two of you should know what the consequences will be, right?" Lu Chen smiled and did not say anything else. Instead, he lowered his body and stroked Atsu's head. Old Ma did not say a word. Xueying glanced at the two of them and did not say anything else. After chatting with them for a while about future arrangements, she said goodbye and left. However, before she left, she secretly gave Old Ma a look. Old Ma coughed and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "You sit here for a while, I will send Hallmaster Xue off." After saying that, he followed Xueying out of the forest. Once they were out of the forest, they immediately felt that their vision was much brighter and their mood was much more cheerful. However, there was not much joy or excitement on Xueying's face. At the edge of the forest, she turned to look at Old Ma. Old Ma laughed bitterly in embarrassment. Xueying coldly snorted and said, "Old Ma, you are also an old man in Fuyunji. I do not need to lecture you on whether this matter is right or wrong, do I?" Old Ma nodded repeatedly and said, "Hallmaster, please calm down. You are indeed in the wrong in this matter. What you said is reasonable. Shuang said. Then why did he insist on bringing that dog along? Logically speaking, this person has been a shadow for more than 10 years. It is impossible for him not to know the rules here. Or is this Lu Chen taking advantage of the Lord True Monarch's high regard for him to purposely give me a hard time? Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, there is absolutely no such thing. Hallmaster, please do not overthink it. Shui Ying's expression fluctuated. She seemed to be a little cold, but she did not seem to be angry. After a while she suddenly smiled and said, forget it. No matter what, we are all working for the Lord True Monarch. Let us keep in touch in the future. After saying that, she nodded to Old Ma and floated away. Old Ma looked at the graceful and beautiful figure and thought of the bloody legends that had tainted this woman in the past. He then looked back at the forest and could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He said in a low voice, they are all troublesome. Chapter 393. This is troublesome. Old Ma looked a little worried and said to Lu Chen, this is a little troublesome. Lu Chen sat on the ground, one hand casually stroking Atsu's head. Atsu also rested its head on Lu Chen's thigh with a satisfied expression. Its two giant eyes were also half closed, and it occasionally grunted twice, as if it was about to fall asleep. Hearing Old Ma's complaint, Lu Chen looked up at him and smiled. What's wrong? Old Ma squatted down beside him, glanced at the huge black dog, and said, you know what's going on, so I don't have to talk nonsense. We'd better keep a low profile when we enter the Immortal City, but if you insist on bringing Atsu, it's really troublesome. Roar. Suddenly, there was a low roar, and it was aggressive, as if a ferocious demon beast had suddenly jumped out of the forest, which startled Old Ma. But when he took a closer look, there was no movement around him. The one who roared was Atsu, who looked simple and silly just now. This giant dog, which was already taller than an adult man, stared at Old Ma with a fierce look in its eyes. It let out a low growl from its throat, but it looked like it was about to bite Old Ma. The snow-white fangs and the fierce look in Atsu's eyes made Old Ma's heart skip a beat, and he subconsciously took a step back. But at this moment, Lu Chen reached out from the side, and with a smile, he slapped Atsu's head, and scolded with a smile. Don't mess around, Old Ma is one of us. Atsu retracted the fangs that he had just bared just a moment ago. He glared at Old Ma and looked a little unwilling, but he still lay down next to Lu Chen while huffing and puffing. Old Ma heaved a sigh of relief and couldn't help cursing again. Damn it! I gave you so many meat bones to eat back then, and now you've forgotten all about it. Lu Chen waved his hand and said to Old Ma, this matter may be a little troublesome, but please take the trouble. The mountains around the Immortal City are not safe. I don't feel at ease leaving Atsu alone outside. Old Ma pondered for a moment and said to Lu Chen, actually, it's not difficult for us to bring Atsu into the city and find a bigger house to stay in. I'm just afraid that after a long time, Atsu will be so bored that they can't take it anymore and run out to the streets. That would be troublesome. Lu Chen thought for a moment, and suddenly asked Old Ma, this time, we won't have to pay for the expenses ourselves, right? Old Ma immediately said, of course, no matter what, we are still working for Fuyunji. At least they have to pay for our daily expenses. Well, I still have to talk to hall leader Shui later to see if she can give me more money to open a shop, a storefront, or something. This is our business without any capital. At the end of his speech, Old Ma rubbed his hands excitedly. It seemed that he still cared about doing business and opening a shop. Even if he had failed repeatedly on the road of business in the past 10 years and suffered countless losses, he still had a lot of money. As someone who had experienced that period of time with Old Ma, Lu Chen was very clear about Old Ma's experience and ability in this regard. But since it was not his own money, Lu Chen did not care about it. He just said to Old Ma seriously, that's good. When you go to ask for money, ask for an extra, a large portion of rations for Atsu. Old Ma was startled and said, a large portion of rations? What is this for? Lu Chen touched the smooth fur on Atsu's back and patted its belly. He smiled and said, this dog is different from ordinary dogs. Believe me, as long as there is enough delicious food, I guarantee that it will be too lazy to take a step out. Old Ma looked at Atsu with some astonishment. He could not help but roll his eyes and said, is there such a thing? I say, are you a dog or a pig? 2 days later, an extremely spacious carriage that could seat 4 to 5 people silently stopped outside the forest. The coachman was a dark, skinny, and capable-looking old man around 50 years of age. He didn't make a sound when he arrived and just parked the carriage without saying a word. Then, he sat in the carriage and waited silently. After a while, Old Ma, Lu Chen, and Atsu walked out of the forest and got on the carriage. From the beginning to the end, the old coachman looked straight ahead and did not look at them. It seemed that he was completely unaware of what was happening behind him. It was not until the sound of Old Ma closing the carriage door was heard that he seemed to suddenly wake up. He also did not look back, but picked up the whip in his hand. With a crack of the whip, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. The carriage turned around and began to walk towards the immortal city in the distance. The carriage was very spacious, and the inside was also clean and tidy. Once the door was closed, it was as if it was isolated from the outside world. There were small windows on both sides of the carriage, but at the same time, there was a curtain so that the people inside the carriage could see the scenery outside, but the people outside the carriage could not see the situation inside the carriage clearly. It was very convenient. After entering the carriage, perhaps because Lu Chen had already told them beforehand, Atsu obediently lay on the wooden plank, while Lu Chen and Old Ma sat opposite each other. The carriage was spacious enough, and they sat comfortably. They heard the sound of the wheels rolling along the way. They gradually moved from the quiet mountains to the road, and as they gradually approached the huge and bustling immortal city, more and more people came and went around the carriage, and there were all kinds of sounds. Listening to the various sounds that came from outside the carriage, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Where are we going?" Old Ma said, "Hall leader Shui has already made arrangements. Through secret means, he found a spacious house for us. It will not attract attention. We will go and stay there first, and then we will move slowly." Lu Chen nodded and said, "After all, this immortal city is Zhengxianmeng's territory. It is convenient to do things, and the speed is much faster than other places." Old Ma glanced at him, but shook his head and said, "You are wrong about this." Lu Chen was a little surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma looked out of the window through the curtain and said, "You rarely come here. Even if you come occasionally, because your identity is hidden, you will not come into contact with the people here in Zhengxianmeng, so you do not understand the current situation. Now in this immortal city, Zhengxianmeng, there are scenes of overcrowding everywhere. There are all kinds of big and small yamen in the immortal city, and there are countless redundant officials. To do a simple thing they have to worship a lot of bodhisattvas, make people break their legs, and then accept bribes and money to do things. It is a common practice." Speaking of this, Old Ma smiled thoughtfully and said, "Normally speaking, if we want to buy such a house through ordinary means, and we don't give them money, and we just do things according to the proper rules, let alone 2 days, it will take at least 2 months. Lu Chen frowned and said after a moment of silence, "According to what you said, what if I go to do something and say that it was the damn Baldy who gave me the task? Will those people speed up?" Old Ma hesitated and seemed to be thinking for a moment. Then he said, With the reputation of a perfected immortal, maybe it can be done faster by 10 days. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, "The damn Baldy's reputation can only be faster by 10 days? Old Ma also laughed and said, "More or less. These things are too small and too complicated, but there are rules to follow. You, a perfected immortal, can't be too serious with your subordinates. It's embarrassing enough, so it's more or less like this." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Then why can it be so fast this time? It seems that Hall leader Shui seems to be different from others?" "Yes, in the Immortal Alliance, Fuyunji is sometimes like an anomaly. He does things quickly, and his level of command is far better than the other halls. But because of this, our hall leader Shui Ying has also been criticized a lot. People say that she likes to be in the limelight, is arrogant, and flatters perfected immortals and so on. However, this is what I think about this matter." He raised his head to look at Lu Chen and said indifferently, "A person whose hands are stained with blood will always move faster than those mediocre people, right?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "You are right." Chapter 394. There were no city walls in the immortal city. Other than the majestic celestial dragon mountains standing tall on the north side, the east, west, and south sides were all flat plains. A few large rivers flowed through the plains, and the fertile land was filled with undulating buildings and pavilions. The bustling place could be said to be unparalleled in the world. This was the largest city in the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, and also the city with the largest population in history. Hundreds of millions of creatures gathered here, and the countless joys and sorrows of the human world played out. Perhaps it was because this place was too prosperous and flourishing that there was no city wall in the world that could encircle it. It was like the legendary divine tree that had existed since the beginning of the world, growing uncontrollably and wildly. There were ancient ruins in the immortal city, and the scale of these ruins was extremely large. There were many traces of ruins on the surface, and the scale of the ruins underground was even larger. There were countless secrets hidden inside, and perhaps there were countless treasures. Of course, there could also be countless dangers and monsters. For so many years, the legend about this ancient ruins had long been deeply rooted in people's hearts, and there were countless versions of it. However, at this time, the rumors were ultimately just gossip, because the big shots of Zhengxianmeng had cast a spell to seal this ancient ruins many years ago. When the carriage entered the streets of the immortal city and steadily moved forward, through the curtains on the carriage, Lu Chen's gaze passed over the houses of different heights on both sides of the street, and saw a very tall but obviously broken statue in the distance. It had huge fangs and a mighty aura. Standing on top of the city, it seemed to overlook all living things, and it had its own domineering aura, like a giant beast pouncing on one's face. Lu Chen stared in that direction from afar in the carriage. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He felt that the already broken eye of the giant beast on the statue seemed to have suddenly come to life at a certain moment, and looked into the carriage. It was like a shocking roar in the dark, suddenly exploding in one's mind, causing one's body to suddenly turn cold. But very quickly, that feeling receded like the tide, and there was no more sound, as if it was a dream. Lu Chen's gaze did not leave the statue. After looking at it in silence for a while, he suddenly asked Old Ma, "Is that a white tiger?" Old Ma looked back at the window, then nodded and said, "Well, yes. The place we're going to this time is in the White Tiger District. That mythological beast statue is too tall. No matter how far it is, as long as you are here, you can probably see it if you raise your head. I guess it's the same in our residence." Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma, and a glimmer of light flashed in the depths of his eyes. "How did you feel when you looked at the white tiger statue?" Old Ma was startled for a moment. Then he shrugged and smilingly said, "What can I feel? It's nothing more than a sigh. This statue, together with the other 3 giant statues of mythological beasts in the immortal city, is said to be originally from this relic. It's just that after so many years, no one can figure out its origin." Lu Chen nodded, his gaze slightly drooping. His expression seemed to have some subtle changes, but very quickly returned to normal. He nodded and said, "Indeed, the person who could create such a giant statue must also be an incomparably powerful race." Old Ma chuckled and said, "Most likely. But who knows, no matter how powerful they are, there are no traces of them now. Perhaps they have encountered some natural or man-made disaster, and have already perished." The sound of the carriage carried them away, leaving only the giant white tiger statue that stood majestically under the sunlight. It still stood there motionlessly, as if it was still waiting for something in the quiet years. Their new residence in the immortal city was still very good. It was on the side of a gentle tributary of the Mirror River, one of the 4 major rivers. This was the depths of the White Tiger District, and the surroundings had long been filled with houses. The carriage first crossed a stone bridge called Horse-Washing Bridge, and then went down to a fork in the road. There was a street with 2 opposite alleys. The alley on the left was called Stoneflower Alley. This name sounded a little strange, and no one knew when it was given this name, but it was clearly written as such on the road sign. Entering Stoneflower Alley, there was a row of houses of various sizes. Most of them looked like large mansions with clear facades. There were about 11 or 12 families. The carriage took them all the way to the deepest part of the alley, and stopped at the door. The old and lean coachman got off the carriage, went forward to open the door, and directly drove the carriage in. When the door closed, Lu Chen, Old Ma, and Black Dog jumped down from the carriage, and after that, their new home was revealed in front of them. It looked like an ordinary house with 2 entrances. On the outside, there was a living room, a few small rooms, and it looked like an ordinary family's kitchen, storeroom, and the like. On the inside, there were 2 rooms in the east and west, and a courtyard in the middle, surrounded by a veranda, just enough for one person to have 1 bedroom. The whole house was clean and tidy, and very quiet. It looked like a good place to live. Obviously, when Shueying from Fuyunji arranged this matter, she had put in a lot of thought. After bringing them here, the old coachman quickly took his leave, and it looked like he was not willing to stay for a long time. It seemed that these two people were scourges in his eyes, and if they stayed too long, they might get into trouble. The courtyard was not very big, but it was enough for Atsu to stroll around for a while. Lu Chen did not care that Atsu was curiously sniffing and running around the house, and turned to Old Ma and said, "Are we going to stay here?" "Yes, what do you think?" Old Ma replied. Lu Chen said, "It's okay, anyway, we don't really care about this." "All right, where are the other things?" Old Ma said, "They said that they have everything arranged. They should be placed somewhere in this house." "Oh," Lu Chen said, "looking for it?" The two of them walked together. They first went to look at the bedroom, and after they were satisfied, they walked through the entire house. Finally, they found the neatly piled goods in a storeroom in front of them. There were so many of them that they looked like a small mountain, and they were about to fill the storeroom to the brim. Other than some daily necessities, most of the things here were food, and they were all neatly stacked. Then, they quickly realized that there was a large amount of valuable demon beast flesh. Obviously, the people in Fuyunji had found out about what Lu Chen said previously. Standing at the door of the storeroom and looking at the small mountain that was much taller than their heads, Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other and were speechless for a while. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Look at this and think about the 10 years that we lived in Qingshutang village, those hard times. Damn, isn't the difference in our lives too big?" Old Ma looked like he was gritting his teeth, and he said bitterly, "Fuyunji is actually so rich here. Damn. I suffered for 10 years for nothing." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and looked at Old Ma with a faint smile. Then, he patted his shoulder and turned around. Old Ma was still depressed, and he glared at the full storeroom angrily. Suddenly, he slammed the door shut, and followed behind Lu Chen. At the same time he scolded, "Corruption!" Chapter 395. What was a house? It was just a piece of land surrounded by 4 walls. A few rooms were built, and a few beds were placed. One could sleep peacefully and shelter them from the wind and rain. Immortal City was the most prosperous place in the world. However, when Lu Chen and Old Ma stayed in their current house, the wall seemed to isolate them from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. The two of them chose their own bedrooms. Lu Chen then went to the storeroom and took out a large piece of meat from an unknown demonic beast and threw it to Atu. As expected, this fellow ran to the courtyard with a piece of meat in his mouth and lay down on the grass by the side of the wall. Then, he began to enjoy the delicious meal by himself with a satisfied expression. When Lu Chen and Old Ma finished tidying up their rooms and settled their luggage, it was already dusk when they returned to the courtyard. They sat at the original stone table and stone bench in the courtyard. Old Ma took out a tea set as if he was performing a magic trick. The kitchen in front of them was boiling hot water, so they made tea together. Lu Chen was a little surprised. He smiled and said, "You actually carry these things with you. I remember that you used to like to drink with me, right?" Old Ma nodded and poured him a full cup of tea. He said, "It's just a habit that I've developed in the past few years. I'm old now, so I don't like to drink much." Lu Chen's hand that was holding the teacup paused in mid-air. Then he put it to his mouth and took a sip as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, "How old are you? You have the nerve to say that you're old?" He smacked his lips as if he was savoring the aftertaste. After a moment he said, "This tea is not bad." Old Ma smiled, then sighed and said, "How can we not be old? We've been in this business for more than 10 or 20 years. The two of us can actually be considered to have lived a long life." Lu Chen thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, I think so." Old Ma clicked his tongue and narrowed his eyes as if he was recalling something from the past. He said, "I remember when I first entered the industry, people told me that if I did well, I would have power and wealth, and that it would be a shortcut to heaven. But no one told me that most people in this industry would have short lives." "Haha, wasn't it the damned Baldy who pulled you into the business?" Lu Chen asked with a smile. Seeing Old Ma shaking his head, Lu Chen seemed to have recalled something. He smiled and said, "Of course I was dragged into this by that damn Baldy. Back then, he didn't talk to me about power and wealth. From the beginning to the end, he only talked to me about justice and the heavenly Tao. Old Ma couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's funny, isn't it? But you don't say, I really believed him at that time. And if I didn't have this belief, maybe I wouldn't have been able to come back alive from the devil cult." Old Ma smiled and looked at Lu Chen with a gentle and secret pity. He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for him. Lu Chen tapped his fingers on the stone table and looked up at the dusk scenery in the sky. He was lost in thought and didn't speak for a while. After a while, he suddenly heard Old Ma ask, "Then when did you stop believing in these things?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes, squinted at him, pointed at him and said with a smile, "It was when I lived with you for 10 years. Old Ma quickly spat and said, "Don't talk nonsense, it has nothing to do with me. You don't dare to go out and say this. If it reaches Zhenjuan's ears, he will definitely kill me." Lu Chen laughed. Old Ma shook his head and sighed. "I'm old, I really don't want to do it anymore. What about you? I remember you told me before that you don't seem to have the energy. Why did you come all the way here to meet Zhenjuan and then decide to do it again?" Lu Chen raised his head and finished the tea in his cup, as if he had just gulped down a bowl of strong liquor. Then, he let out a light breath and said with a smile, "That damned Baldy begged me, but I couldn't put aside my pride. Well, maybe I still believe a little of what you just said about the justice of the common people." "It would be strange if I believed you," Old Ma scolded with a smile. Night came and everyone went back to their rooms. After the door was closed, there was only silence and darkness. Atsu's body was now too big, it could no longer stay in bed with Lu Chen like before, so it was naturally chased to the ground. Fortunately, this big black dog had the bloodline of the celestial wolf and was now a holy beast, so it was completely unafraid of the cold on the ground. In addition, it had eaten a large piece of demon beast meat today, so it was full of energy. So soon, Lu Chen heard the sound of snoring coming from Atsu. It seemed that it had fallen asleep. But Lu Chen couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed, opened his eyes, and quietly looked at the darkness. Until dawn. The next morning, Old Ma knocked on the door and said to Lu Chen, "I'm going to find Shuang today, do you want to come?" At this time, Lu Chen had just gotten up, and the lazy dog Atsu was still lying on the ground, snoring. No one knew how long it would sleep for. Lu Chen called Old Ma to the courtyard and asked, "What's so urgent? We just moved in yesterday, and you're going to find her today?" "I'm going to ask her for money," Old Ma said confidently. Lu Chen was startled and said, "What money? Didn't she already help us settle down here? The food and necessities are also enough." Old Ma sneered and said, "This time, we are people who are going to do big things. How can we not have money and spirit stones? Besides, do you think she's so kind as to arrange so many things for us for no reason?" Lu Chen suddenly became a little curious and asked with a smile, "What do you mean?" Old Ma pointed to the north. From afar, the majestic and tall Mount Tianlong stood majestically like a giant guarding this huge city. And at the foot of Mount Tianlong was where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. "That's because after I went to report your arrival to the Immortal, he personally promised that we would be satisfied this time. As long as we work hard, we will be treated well." Lu Chen's eyes lit up and he clapped his hands and laughed. "I see. Looks like we can get more than just this." "Of course." Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, "Just wait and see. If we don't say it, Shuang definitely won't give us money. This time, I'm going to get at least 1 or 2,000 spirit stones to spend first." Lu Chen interrupted him and said, "Are you stupid? You only want 1 or 2,000 spirit stones from a divine transformation immortal. Add 10 times that." Old Ma sucked in a breath of cold air and widened his eyes. "Isn't it too much to ask for so much? If I anger Shuang, she might kick me out on the spot." Lu Chen sneered. "This money doesn't belong to her. Needless to say, it must be from Zhengxianmeng. If we don't want it, we'll naturally spend it elsewhere. Plus, don't you want to have tens of thousands of spirit stones in your hands and walk around the immortal city with us?" Old Ma's expression changed. After a moment, he clapped his hands and said fiercely, "You're right. How can we do things without money? That kind of big thing can only be done with a lot of money." Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, "You finally understood. Congratulations." Old Ma chuckled and turned to walk out. But after a few steps, he suddenly looked back at Lu Chen and said, "Hey, Lu Chen." Old Ma said, "When you were chatting with me yesterday, you said something about justice for all the people in the world, and so on. Maybe you still believe it in your heart?" Lu Chen frowned and said, "Yes, I did." "Why?" Old Ma said sternly, "Forget about these things. Trust me, you don't believe in these things anymore. Get lost." Chapter 396. After Old Ma went out, the house suddenly became much quieter. Lu Chen returned to the courtyard and sat down. He glanced at his bedroom. Through the open door, he could see that Atsu, the big lazy dog, was still lying on the ground, snoring loudly. It seemed that the demon beast meat that Shui Ying asked people to prepare yesterday was of high quality. Only after eating this kind of high-quality demon beast meat that was full of spiritual power would Atsu become so sleepy. In fact, it was because its body had absorbed too much spiritual power and needed more time to digest it. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched slightly and he shook his head. It made him feel a little helpless. For demon beasts like Atsu, which had the incomparably powerful celestial wolf bloodline, as long as it had enough good food, it could often increase its strength just by sleeping. As for the human race, who were now known as the rulers of the divine continent, if they wanted to obtain stronger power, they had to cultivate for their entire lives. Even the powerful divine transformation stage true monarchs were the same. Every cultivator would almost never stop cultivating throughout their lives. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If one did not advance, one would fall back. Was this another way of saying that humans were inferior to dogs? Well, at least this dog was stupid. As Lu Chen thought of this, he felt a little better. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. After that, he stood up and carefully looked around before walking back to his bedroom and closing the door behind him. After the door was closed, the light in the room became a little darker. However, Atsu, who was sleeping on the ground, didn't notice this. Of course, it could have been aware of this, but with Lu Chen by its side, it was enough to let it relax and sleep peacefully. Lu Chen locked the door, then returned to the side of the bed and lay down. His face was calm as he regulated his breathing. After a while, he put his hand on his chest and closed his eyes. With a hum sound, a white light lit up. At that moment, the light in the space above the bed seemed to distort rapidly. After a moment, Lu Chen's body disappeared. Only a seed quietly fell from the air and gently landed on the soft bedding without making a sound. In the ancient and mysterious tree hole, the same white light flashed, and then Lu Chen's body appeared in the hole. Because he had been here too many times and was too familiar with this place, Lu Chen almost subconsciously adjusted his body in mid-air. He used his hand to lightly press the ground, and his whole body nimbly stood up. The gray and misty floating tree walls, the quiet and clear puddles, and some of the things he had piled up in the corner looked the same as before. Nothing had changed. Of course, there was also a sense of quietness, or perhaps loneliness. Lu Chen looked around and walked to the water hole in the center of the tree hole. He squatted down and looked into the water. Many years ago, this puddle of water used to be a dark green color filled with dense vitality. Now, it had reduced to transparent and colorless ripples. There used to be nothing in the water, but now there were two things. One was a strange black fire that was still burning in the water, and the other was an aquatic spirit plant. It was the black mud lotus that Atsu stole in Kunlun Mountain. Lu Chen hadn't paid attention to the movement here for a while. Today, after coming over to take a closer look, he suddenly frowned slightly. He found something unusual. The cluster of black fire was similar to before. There wasn't much change, but the black mud lotus that was originally placed in the water to preserve the quality of its spiritual power seemed to have changed significantly. At some point, one end of the black mud lotus had already pierced into the soil at the bottom of the puddle, while the other end was slightly raised. Looking at the tiny roots that had begun to grow out of the lotus, this aquatic spirit plant seemed to have settled down in the puddle and had begun to germinate again. This made Lu Chen a little surprised. When that stupid dog Atsu stole this spirit plant, he didn't think about preserving it. He dug it out directly and crudely, directly biting off all the original roots. He didn't expect that the black mud lotus could be reborn here. It seemed to be a spirit plant with a very tenacious vitality. But soon, Lu Chen found that there seemed to be something wrong with this black mud lotus. It seemed to be a bit too black. As the name suggested, the black mud lotus grew in the mud, and most of the spirit plants were black in color. This was indeed the case, But in Lu Chen's eyes, the black color had changed a lot compared to the original color. The black color on the body of the black mud lotus was deep and translucent. It was far from the grade of an ordinary spirit plant. It could even be said that the black mud lotus looked like a piece of flawless black jade, with a bit of crystal clarity. This kind of color and light was not ordinary at first glance. But what made Lu Chen's expression more serious was that through the surface of the bright and translucent black, he could faintly feel a familiar aura that quietly resonated with a certain dark power in his body. The power of the black fire? Lu Chen raised his head and looked around the tree hole, then looked at the black fire in the water. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the black fire had infected the black mud lotus, or if the tree hole itself had some kind of mysterious power that he didn't know. He silently pondered for a long time. In the end, he didn't touch the obviously mutated spirit plant, and stood up. He walked to the edge of the tree hole, stretched out a hand, and gently stroked the tree wall. He slowly walked forward. The ancient and rough tree wall left a faint response in his palm, but his eyes were looking forward. Seed branch. In the silence, he said to himself, if this is really a part of the tree of God, then it's probably only 2 leaves away from the evil sect's legendary miracle? There was only silence in the tree hole, and only his voice echoed. Lu Chen raised his head and found that he had already walked to the bottom of the 2 hidden doors on the tree wall. He stared at the door for a long time and suddenly said, the legendary tree of God has a spirit. If you were its seed, what would you think? Would you want that leaf to come back here? The tree hole was still silent. The green gas on the tree wall slowly floated and drifted, as if a little uneasy, but also as if there was nothing unusual. Lu Chen shook his head, turned and walked towards the waterhole, ready to leave. But just as he stepped on the edge of the puddle, the pupils in his eyes suddenly shrank. He abruptly stopped and looked forward. He saw that in this ancient tree hole, the originally slow and misty green gas on the tree wall suddenly floated rapidly, and then rushed from all directions in one direction. That direction was right behind him. Lu Chen's body trembled, and after a moment, he suddenly turned around. At this moment, a strange buzzing sound suddenly rang out in the originally quiet tree hole. It sounded like the sound of the wind, but it also sounded like the whistling of the wind. In this strange sound, all the green gas on the tree walls rushed towards one direction, and it was impressively one of the 2 strange doors. On that strange door, the green gas gathered together, rolling and twisting incessantly, changing into all kinds of indescribable forms. Until the last moment, all of the green gas gradually slowed down, condensed into a pattern, reflected in the air in front of Lu Chen's eyes. Lu Chen's face suddenly turned a little strange, a little pale. Perhaps he had suddenly discovered the secret of this tree hole that had never appeared before, or perhaps he had thought of something even further away. He stood in the tree hole for a while, then slowly nodded his head and turned around without saying a word. Whew! A faint white light flashed. This person disappeared in this ancient tree hole. After a moment, the green gas slowly dispersed, reintegrated, adhered to the tree wall, scattered and drifted to every corner, and once again became the same as before. It was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 397. Old Ma came back in the evening. When he entered the backyard, he saw Lu Chen sitting there and drinking by himself. Atsu had woken up from its sleep, but at this moment, it had slipped to the corner of the courtyard wall and was happily gnawing on a large piece of meat. Needless to say, this was the food that Lu Chen had given it. TSK 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 TSK. Old Ma exclaimed, then walked to Lu Chen's side and sat down. Looking at Atsu, he said to Lu Chen, a dog that eats a large piece of high-grade demonic beast meat every day. Even in a place like the Immortal City, where there are countless rich people, it is definitely rare. The 2 of us can't do it, but this dog can definitely be ranked at the top of the dog clan in the Immortal City. Lu Chen smiled and said, are you still jealous of this dog, Atsu? Humans are inferior to dogs. Old Ma sighed, then turned his head. However, Lu Chen waved his hand, raised his eyebrows, and said casually, don't talk nonsense. Now, Atsu can eat so freely because of Fuyunji. Anyway, it's not our money. A house full of demonic beast meat is expensive, and it's all public property. It's a waste not to eat it. Old Ma curled his lips, looking a little disdainful, and said, with your selfish thoughts at the expense of the public, you still dared to talk to me about the righteous path of the common people yesterday. Don't you feel guilty? Hearing the words the righteous path of the common people, Before old Ma's voice fell, Lu Chen hurriedly said with a serious expression, I am brave and upright, don't speak nonsense to slander me. And those are two completely different things. Atsu eating meat has nothing to do with my righteous path. Old Ma nodded repeatedly and said, Yes, yes, I believe you, I believe you. Lu Chen laughed. After a while he patted old Ma's shoulder and asked with a smile, Don't talk about this. Did you get anything today? I've gained a lot. Old Ma replied with a smile, looking very happy. When I went to look for hall leader Shui, I was too embarrassed to tell him the amount of money we wanted, said old Ma with a sigh. Lu Chen snorted and said rudely, Cut the crap. I've known you for more than 10 years, and I've never seen you so shy. It would be strange if you didn't say it. Old Ma was furious and shouted, Bullshit! How could I be such a person? Lu Chen nodded slowly and confidently. You are indeed this kind of person. Otherwise, why would you go to Fuyunji? Old Ma was startled, but he didn't get angry. After thinking for a while, he actually nodded and said, What you said seems to make some sense. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, Tell me, how much money did you ask for? And what was Shui Ying's reaction? Did she agree? Old Ma said, At that time I mustered up my courage. Hey, can you not look at me like that? All right, I thickened my face and told her that we were going to do something big and needed money, so we needed 30,000 spiritual stones. I'll go. Lu Chen was holding a glass of wine in his hand. Hearing this, he almost spilled the wine on himself. With great difficulty, he grabbed the glass firmly and immediately raised his head to stare at old Ma. What did you say? How much was it again? Old Ma laughed dryly and stretched out 3 fingers. 30,000 spiritual stones. Lu Chen sized up Old Horse's fat body from head to toe, and then sighed. It's been so many years, but I still haven't seen through you. Damn fat pig, you're even more thick-skinned and black-hearted than I thought. Hey, it's fine if you say I'm thick-skinned and black-hearted, but don't call me a fat pig and curse me. Old Ma sat there and protested unhappily. Lu Chen snorted again. At this time, he casually poured the wine in his hand into his mouth and said sarcastically, Yesterday, didn't you only ask for 1 or 2,000 spiritual stones? Let me tell you, why don't you ask for 10 or 20,000? You ran over yourself and actually added another 10,000 spiritual stones, this is 2. For a moment, he didn't know what to say and could only shake his head. Old Ma shrugged and looked like he was ready to risk everything. This is what I think. Anyway, at this point, there is not much difference between 10,000, 20,000, and 30,000. Why not say 30,000? First, ask for a sky-high price, and then wait for her to return the money. Lu Chen nodded and smiled. What you said makes a lot of sense. Now please tell me, how did our hall leader Shui Ying react when she heard your price? She sat there for a long time and didn't move. After staring at me for a while, she kicked me over and then chased me out. Old Ma said honestly and spread his hands. This is what you meant by a big gain? Lu Chen looked at Old Ma unhappily. Old Ma grunted. He thought for a moment and said, At least we know that Shui Ying can't give us 30,000 spiritual stones, right? Next time when we ask for money, we'll just ask for less. Lu Chen put his hand on his forehead. He didn't want to look at his friend anymore. When the sky gradually darkened, countless houses in the corners of the immortal city lit up one after another. Looking from afar, this city didn't show any signs of being quiet in the night. Instead, it looked even more brilliant under the night sky. Even the night seemed to become noisy and lively under the contrast of this city. Perhaps this was a city that didn't sleep. In the night, many interesting or strange things would appear. Some of these things didn't exist during the day. For example, there were many different shops that closed during the day and only opened at night. In the immortal city, people usually called these places that only opened at night, nightclubs. Lu Chen and Old Ma walked on the flat and spacious streets of the immortal city in the night. Looking at the bustling crowd around them, they felt a little emotional. At Qingshitang village, the entire village should be asleep by now, right? Old Ma turned and asked Lu Chen. Definitely. In that shabby village, there's nothing to do but sleep. Lu Chen looked at the lively scene around him with interest and sighed. Old Ma laughed happily and said, Hey, seriously, after we finish this job and earn a lot of money, We'll find a corner in this immortal city to stay. What do you think? He sighed and said, there's probably no better place in the world than here. Lu Chen said, wake up. This is naturally the best place in the world, but the people who can live a good life here are all top rich people. Don't you know how much the housing prices in this immortal city are? What right do you have to think about this? Old Ma was stunned. After a moment of silence, he revealed a dejected expression and said, you're right. It seems like we really can't afford it. So don't think about it. Let's go. There's a nightclub in front. Let's go and take a look. Lu Chen pulled Old Ma and walked forward with a smile. Old Ma also chuckled, but then he seemed to think of something and asked Lu Chen worriedly, all right, the two of us ran out like this and left Atsu alone at home. Isn't that bad? It's fine. Lu Chen said absent-mindedly. Don't worry. That guy will sleep until dawn after he's full. He'll be fine. Old Ma glanced at him, then nodded and said, oh. At this time, Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up. He pointed to somewhere in front of them and said with a smile, we're here. I've long heard that the nightclubs in the immortal city are unparalleled in the world. Let's come and broaden our horizons today. Old Ma turned his head and saw a brilliant and bustling scene in front of him. Beautiful purple and red flowers bloomed in the night, adding a bit of charm to the night. Red lights swayed and fluttered with the wind. A tall building rose from the ground. Countless young and beautiful faces stretched out their red sleeves and laughed on the building. The night gradually darkened and the lights were brilliant. The light shone over and seemed to pull their figures over, hiding them in the depths of the lights. Chapter 398. What are we doing here? Old Ma stood in front of the warm and fragrant nightclub. He was grinning from ear to ear. His hands kept waving at the gorgeously dressed girls in front of him, and then he asked Lu Chen in a low voice. Don't play dumb. Lu Chen scolded. Old Ma tried to explain. He put his hand on his chest and said seriously, in fact, I haven't been to such a place for a long time. Ha! Lu Chen was surprised. He looked at the fat man and frowned. You've been here before? Old Ma sighed and said, when I was young, I was frivolous and bored. I would occasionally come to the nightclub. Well, I mainly wanted to find someone to talk to and relieve my troubles. Lu Chen looked at him more and more disdainfully and said, you were a frequent visitor to such places when you were young. Old Ma choked for a moment and suddenly became angry out of shame. He glared at Lu Chen indignantly and said, aren't you the same? You come to the nightclub with a familiar look. Do you think I can't see it? Not to mention that you dragged me here tonight. Lu Chen sneered and waved his hand. What do you know? I did come to such places in the past, but because I was on the enemy's side, I had to feign civility. Even in such a place, I kept my mind clear and was careful for the big things. Old Ma snorted and looked like he didn't believe it. He just said, cut the crap. Why did you drag me here tonight? Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, to do something. The thing that the higher-ups want us to find. Old Ma was shocked and his face suddenly became serious. He whispered, what, Yi is here? How do you know? Lu Chen shook his head and said, I don't know. It's not that easy to find. What I mean is, we can't find what the damn Baldy wants us to find in a hurry. We can only explore bit by bit. But if Yi is in those people's hands, maybe what we need to do is to find them first. Old Ma pondered for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, you mean, through these nightclubs? Lu Chen said indifferently, as time has passed, many of their communication methods must have changed. I don't have much confidence in finding them. However, there are always some things that won't change. For example, after they go into hiding, they will need to do something in the open to make a living. There will probably be people who want to do things that they are familiar with to save energy. Old Ma nodded and said, that makes sense. Shall we go in and give it a try? Okay. Lu Chen walked forward with his hands behind his back. At the same time he said, by the way, I don't have any money with me. Old Ma was startled and suddenly became nervous. He was about to speak when he suddenly saw Lu Chen turn his head and smile. He whispered, look at the expenses here tonight. Tomorrow, we will go to Shui Ying's place and try to get more money to spend. Old Ma chuckled and his worries turned into joy. He nodded as if he had suddenly realized something. Of course. She sang and danced gracefully. Her smile was like a blossoming flower, and the fragrance of makeup and powder permeated the air. In a trance, there was a sudden feeling of emptiness. Lu Chen hugged the smiling woman beside him and smiled as he drank the wine in his glass. The wine was mellow with a trace of bitterness as it burned down his throat. He looked ahead and saw that old Ma was just like him. He was all smiles and seemed to be in high spirits. He was hugging two young girls, eating fruits and drinking wine. Drinking wine in the land of warmth and gentleness was like being drunk several times in life. Lu Chen raised his head and looked out the window. The moonlight was just right. The bright moon hung in the sky. It was the best time of the night. He smiled and stood up. His eyes were a little intoxicated. He first whispered to the woman beside him and then reached out to touch her cheek. The girl actually blushed and looked a little shy. She did not stop him. Then, Lu Chen walked out. His steps were a little weak. At the same time he smiled at old Ma and said, "You have fun. I'm going to relieve myself. I'll be back in a moment." Old Ma laughed but did not seem to have time to answer him. He went back to the land of warmth and gentleness. The girls beside him covered their mouths and chuckled. They opened the door for Lu Chen and pointed him in the direction. Lu Chen staggered. He seemed to be drunk. His face was a little red. He walked down the stairs. Under the red lantern, his figure looked a little hazy, but also a little lonely. It was already late at night. Even though the nightclub was still in the middle of a party, the courtyard downstairs was still surrounded by darkness and silence. Lu Chen quietly turned around from the darkness. As the darkness swallowed his figure, his eyes suddenly became clear and bright. His eyes also became sharp as he coldly looked around. He examined the quiet courtyard. There were rockery, ponds, trees, and bushes of flowers. There were sounds of laughter coming from the pavilion in the distance. If he listened carefully, he would probably be able to tell that one or two of the voices belonged to that damned fatty. Lu Chen moved his body in the darkness. Like a shadow passing by, he came to the side of a few trees in the courtyard. He quickly but carefully examined them. He even touched the roots of several trees with his hand. But after a moment, he stood up and seemed to have found nothing. Lu Chen took a few steps forward. This time, he came to the side of the pond in the courtyard. There was a stone railing here. Lu Chen bent down and put his hand directly into the water. He pressed a few times under the water. A few ripples spread out. Lu Chen didn't know what he sensed in the water, but he quickly jumped up and returned to his original position. He looked like a guest standing by the side of a pond looking at the scenery in the water. The moon in the sky was originally reflected in the water. But at this moment, there were some ripples. It was a little messy and began to shake. In the courtyard ahead, there were two figures talking and laughing. They stopped about 10 feet in front of him. With the moonlight, it seemed that they were two girls. "Mister, why are you standing here?" a young girl asked Lu Chen with a surprised look on her face when she saw him. Lu Chen put his hand on his forehead and shook his head. "I drank too much. I came out for a walk." The two girls looked at each other and then said at the same time, "Then let us help you back." "Okay." After an hour, the two men walked out of this gentle place and walked to their home in the distance under the cover of the night. "Hey, why are you so strange?" When there was no one else around and only the two of them were on the long and dark street, old Ma said to Lu Chen angrily, "People who go to the nightclub to play at this time, why would they leave and go home?" Lu Chen said with a smile, "I'm worried about Atsu. I'd better go back and have a look." Old Ma snorted and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me the truth." Lu Chen said, "This is not the place we are looking for. Let's go." Old Ma was startled. The drunkenness on his face seemed to have sobered up a little. He said, "Are you sure?" Lu Chen said, "Yeah, more or less." Old Ma looked at him and suddenly said, "You seem to have changed a lot since you came back." Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma did not answer him. He only walked forward in silence for a while. Then he suddenly said, "When you were in King Shutang village, did you go to see Ding Dang?" "Yes, I did." "Yeah, how was it?" "There was grass growing on the grave. I pulled it out for her and tidied it up. I also talked to her for a while." Old Ma looked at him. He wanted to say something but stopped. Then he sighed and walked forward. Let's go home. Chapter 399. In the dark of the night, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked side by side. For a while, neither of them spoke. Just like that, they walked across the long street. When they reached the horse-washing bridge, Old Ma suddenly stopped in the middle of the bridge and listened for a while, then looked down. Lu Chen paused and said, "Why aren't you walking?" Old Ma pointed to the river under the bridge and said, "Look, doesn't this river look like Qingshui Creek?" Qingshui Creek was the stream in Qingshutang village. Lu Chen and Old Ma had lived there for 10 years, so of course they knew. He walked to the edge of the bridge and looked down. He saw that the tributary was indeed very calm and quiet. In the darkness of the night, there was almost no sound of water splashing. It was really similar to the small stream in the mountain village in the past. However, Lu Chen did not laugh. He only looked at the stream under his feet. After a while he shook his head and said, "This river is much bigger than Qingshui Creek and much deeper." "It doesn't look like it." Old Ma was startled. A trace of surprise flashed across his face. His expression was also a little complicated. After a while he seemed to sigh and said, "Seems like you don't miss the 10 years you lived in Qingshutang village." "There's nothing to miss," Lu Chen said faintly. "In those 10 years, we just hid like turtles, desperately avoiding the pursuit of the devil cult. Day and night, we were always like a string that was stretched taut. When we saw a stranger, we would suspect whether he was a killer or not. What's so good about these days of fear?" He paused for a while and turned his head to look into the distance. After a moment of silence he said, "Not to mention that I still had my old injuries. Every now and then, they would act up and it was unbearable. So you want to ask me about those 10 years? I don't like it at all." Old Ma nodded silently and said, "What you said does make sense. But as far as I'm concerned, sometimes I feel that staying in Qingshutang village for 10 years made me far away from right and wrong, far away from scheming, not to mention killing and arson for a living. So now that I think about it, I don't think those days were too hard." Lu Chen looked at him and suddenly smiled. "Why did you suddenly think of the past?" Old Ma also laughed. He patted the stone railing on the bridge beside him, then walked forward and said, "I'm probably a little old." He walked down the bridge, but when he was 5 or 6 steps away, he suddenly heard Lu Chen call him from behind. Old Ma stopped and turned around in surprise. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen walked over and frowned slightly. Looking at Old Ma's face, his expression seemed to be more serious and dignified than before. He said, "You've said this to me several times recently. You're not in a good mood." Is that so?" Old Ma was a little surprised. It seemed like he didn't notice what Lu Chen said. Lu Chen stared at him for a while and then said calmly, "Don't say this again, especially not in front of our perfected cultivator, understand?" Old Ma's expression changed slightly as if he thought of something. The corner of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to say something, but he saw that Lu Chen had already turned around and walked towards the alley. Looking at Lu Chen's back, Old Ma wanted to say something but stopped himself. For a moment, his expression seemed to have become unusually subtle and complicated. After returning to the residence, or rather back to their home, they didn't say a word. When the door was closed and they were finally separated from the outside world, they probably felt a sense of relief. In the deep courtyard at night, their rooms were far away from each other. When they arrived here, Lu Chen first greeted Old Ma and was ready to return to his room. But at this time, Old Ma suddenly stopped him and looked at the door, saying, "Where's Atsu? Is he still sleeping inside?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's so quiet around here. He's probably still sleeping like a dead pig." Old Ma also smiled, but he quickly put away his smile and said to Lu Chen, "What you said to me just now is quite good. I'll remember it all." Lu Chen nodded with a smile and didn't say anything. Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "But tonight, I actually have a question in my heart that I want to ask you." Lu Chen said, "Well, go ahead." Old Ma looked at his eyes and said, "It's still the same question, why did you choose that nightclub?" Without waiting for Lu Chen to explain, he waved his hand and said, "We already have this kind of relationship, you don't have to say those nonsense to me. Immortal City is so huge and prosperous. There are countless nightclubs of all sizes. Even though we may have the opportunity to find traces of the evil sect's evil people on this road, but no matter what, it's impossible to really find them one by one like this. He stared at Lu Chen and slowly said, "So, how did you determine that it was that nightclub? Or is it that you're actually just saying it casually, and just went there to have fun?" Lu Chen's eyes slightly drooped, and after a moment he suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, I just went there to have fun, and to see if there's any chance to find any traces, but if there's none, then forget it." Old Ma seemed a little surprised and said in astonishment, "Really like this?" "Yes, yes," Lu Chen said. "Those people from the evil sect are not so easy to find, otherwise, wouldn't the remnants of the evil sect in this immortal city have long been caught and killed by Shuang?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, you're right." Lu Chen laughed, turned around and walked towards his own bedroom, and at the same time said with a smile, "Go back early and rest, don't think too much." "Lu Chen, do you really believe what True Monarch said?" Old Ma suddenly interrupted him. Lu Chen's footsteps were 3 steps away from his door when he suddenly froze and then stopped. In this quiet and serene courtyard in the dead of night, the two of them looked like illusory shadows. "Do you really believe what he said? That legendary tree of God, its branches, leaves, seeds, divine weapons and treasures, and with the power of us mortals, to try to destroy that kind of creation divine object? Do you really believe it?" Old Ma's voice reverberated in the courtyard. The darkness around Lu Chen's body suddenly seemed to thicken, as though his body was obscured, making it difficult for people to see his face clearly. After an unknown period of time, Lu Chen was heard saying calmly, "I believe it." Old Ma did not speak, only looked at him. Lu Chen waved at him, then turned and walked to the door, pushed it open and walked in. After a moment, the 2 doors closed behind him, blocking Old Ma's view. Old Ma's throat moved. His expression seemed a little nervous. After standing silently on the spot for a moment, he also walked out of his bedroom, but when he pushed open the door for some reason, his hand suddenly trembled a little. After a long time with a creak, he pushed open his door and walked in. Standing in his bedroom, Lu Chen noticed at first glance that Atsu did not seem to be sleeping peacefully on the ground. Then he subconsciously looked at the bed, and sure enough, he saw a pair of shining green eyes in the darkness, looking at him. Lu Chen smiled and walked over to sit on the bed. He hugged Atsu, who had been lying on the bed for some time, and patted its head. Atsu also gently rubbed its head against Lu Chen's body. But suddenly Lu Chen found that Atsu's eyes had never moved away from a certain direction. Even when he just came in, it seemed to be looking at that direction at the door or somewhere outside the door. He glanced at Atsu, the smile on his face slowly disappeared, and his eyes became a little colder. Then he followed Atsu's silent gaze and looked at the closed door. And outside the door, if he remembered correctly, after crossing the dark and deep courtyard, it was Old Ma's bedroom. Atsu had been here, staring in that direction. Chapter 400. Old Ma pushed open the door. His body stiffened for a moment, but he still walked in expressionlessly and closed the door behind him. The bedroom was very dark. After all, it was already late at night. However, in the darkness, there was a huge figure sitting there silently. It was like a small mountain. At first glance, it even gave people a feeling that they had to look up to it. It was as if the black figure occupied half of the entire room. Old Ma stood at the door with his head lowered and his hands hanging on both sides of his body. He looked very submissive. After a moment, the voice of the dark figure came from the darkness in front of him. It said, "You're back." Old Ma said respectfully, "Yes. Where did you go tonight?" "I went to a nightclub with Lu Chen." Old Ma answered calmly and clearly. Then, without hiding anything, he told the whereabouts of himself and Lu Chen that night. The dark figure listened silently and did not interrupt at all. It was not until Old Ma finished that he asked, "Is there anything strange about that nightclub?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, "I don't think so. At least, I didn't find anything suspicious. When I came back, I asked Lu Chen, and he said it wasn't here." The huge dark figure was quiet for a while, as if thinking about something. Old Ma seemed to be in awe of the figure. He stood there and waited obediently. After a while, the figure in the dark suddenly moved and seemed to lean forward a little. For some reason at that moment, Old Horse suddenly felt a little dry in his throat. In his daze, he had the illusion of a mountain collapsing on top of him. However, of course, in the darkness, there was no real mountain falling down. On the contrary, there was a strange flash of light. If one looked carefully, they would find that it should be a shiny bald head. Old Ma lowered his head even more. In front of the bald true monarch, he really seemed like a tiny ant. Sometimes, he would wonder why Lu Chen seemed to be able to act so freely in front of this giant, who looked up to him, even though Lu Chen looked about the same as him. Lu Chen called him damn baldy, every day. Old Ma had even seen him curse in front of this immortal. But every time, it seemed that the immortal did not mind and forgave him. It seemed that he was very tolerant of him. Why was that? Xiao Ma. A call in the darkness woke Old Ma up from his thoughts. He quickly answered. In the darkness, immortal Tianlan's eyes were as deep as the sea. It seemed that he could never see what was hidden at the end. He looked at Old Ma and asked, "Do you believe in Lu Chen's words?" Old Ma hesitated for a moment and then asked tentatively, "Which aspect are you talking about? Looking for clues about the nightclub, or both?" "I just want to ask you, do you still believe in him?" Sitting in the darkness, immortal Tianlan said calmly. For some reason, Old Ma suddenly remembered that not long ago, he seemed to have asked Lu Chen almost the same question. Until now, he still remembered Lu Chen's expression when he looked at him. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said to immortal Tianlan respectfully, "Of course I still believe in him." Immortal Tianlan took a deep look at Old Ma and then nodded. He leaned back and disappeared in the darkness again. In the west wing, Lu Chen sat on the bed, and Tu lay next to him. In the darkness, the black dog's eyes were bright and full of life, flashing with a dark green light as it stared in the direction of the door. Lu Chen gently stroked the fur on Atsu's back. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was thinking about something. Once, Atsu suddenly stood up and seemed to want to run out, but was stopped by Lu Chen. He wrapped his arms around Atu's body. Even though he didn't use much strength, Atu's abnormally strong body stopped immediately. He turned around to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen's expression was calm. He lowered his voice so that only Atu could hear him. "Did you feel something?" He pointed at the door. Lu Chen's eyes were wide open. Atu was stunned. Lu Chen's expression was calm. Atsu nodded. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't go there. No matter who it is, they probably don't want us to know, whether it's that person's intention or Old Ma's. I just want to see what Old Ma will say to me tomorrow, or maybe he won't mention it at all." Atsu lowered its head slightly and whispered. Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I don't think Old Ma will hurt me. If he wanted to hurt me, I would have died countless times in the past 10 years. This night was quiet and long, but no one stepped out of their room. In this way, in the silence, they waited for the morning light on the horizon. Facing the morning light, Old Ma opened the door and walked into the yard. He stretched his body and suddenly turned his head. He was a little surprised and said, "Hey, you got up so early?" On the other side of the yard, Lu Chen got up earlier than him. At this moment, he was holding a piece of monster meat in his hand. He cut it into several pieces with a sharp knife and threw it in front of Atsu, who was drooling. Then he walked over and said with a smile, "I can't help it. This dog felt hungry early in the morning and pestered me for food." Old Ma looked at Atsu with some amazement and said, "Atsu is not simple. He can eat so much. Moreover, that's high-grade demonic beast meat. Even us cultivators can't eat that much every day." Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a smile, "Monsters are animals. They are not smart, so naturally their bodies are better. It's not strange." Old Ma also laughed and then asked Lu Chen to sit down at the stone table in the yard. He looked at him and said, "How did you sleep last night?" A glimmer flashed in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, but he didn't show it on his face. He said with a smile, "It's okay. I slept until dawn. What about you?" Old Ma said with a smile, "Me too. Sigh, I'm getting old. When I was young, I used to go to that kind of place to play. Every time I played, I would stay up all night without sleeping. But when I came back yesterday, I fell asleep the moment I went to bed. I don't know anything." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He nodded and said with a smile, "Not bad, not bad. It's good to sleep well." Old Ma laughed and changed the topic. He said, "What are you going to do next? We have settled down here. Since Lord True Monarch has ordered us to do something, we have to try our best to do something. Lu Chen said. Of course. I'm also counting on this to get the qualification to retire for the rest of my life from that damn baldy. He paused for a moment, then smiled and said, how about this? You should go find Xue Ying and ask for a lower price from yesterday. See if you can get some money out of it. This way we can do things easier. As for me, I'll just secretly investigate in the city. See if I can find some clues related to the evil cult? Old Ma looked at him and said, do you have a plan? Lu Chen hesitated for a moment. He said, I have a little idea. But it's not that simple. I still need to look carefully. If I have enough money, it'll probably be faster. Old Ma looked at him. He nodded and stood up. He said, okay, I'll go now. Chapter 401. Old Ma went out, and when he left, he looked both happy and worried. Lu Chen guessed that Old Ma was happy that he might be able to swindle a large sum of money, but worried that he would have to see Xue Ying, who was known to be difficult to deal with. He didn't know if he would be chased out in disgrace again. Lu Chen didn't care about this at all. In any case, he wasn't the one going. Old Ma, that damn fatty, was born to do this kind of work. It didn't matter if he was scolded a few times. However, when Old Ma was about to leave, he still very politely and amicably sent him to the door, and watched as Old Ma left the alley. This made Old Ma feel somewhat flattered, and he asked Lu Chen a few questions about whether he had taken the wrong medicine today. Lu Chen just laughed and scolded him. After joking around for a while, he watched Old Ma's figure disappear into the distance of the alley. He turned around and closed the door, then walked all the way back to the courtyard and sat down. Atsu was still lying in the corner of the courtyard, gnawing on the demon beast meat. While he was enjoying it with great relish and satisfaction, he would occasionally raise his head to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't do anything. He just sat there quietly. The smile on his face disappeared, and he just sat there calmly, expressionless for a long time. The courtyard was silent. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Chen suddenly stood up and walked forward. However, he didn't walk in the direction of his own bedroom. Instead, as if by accident, he went around a corridor and walked to the east wing, which was outside Old Ma's room. The door was closed, but it wasn't locked from the outside. Because the person who lived here had gone out to collect debts, the door should be unlocked. It was impossible that the door could be locked from the inside after Old Ma left. Lu Chen's footsteps paused in front of Old Ma's door. For a moment, there seemed to be a trace of strangeness in the depths of his eyes, but after a moment, he still very calmly reached out his hand, as if he had walked out of his own house, and used his hand to push the door. With a creak, the door gently opened inwards. Sunlight shone from behind Lu Chen, entering the closed bedroom. At the same time, Lu Chen's figure formed a long shadow at the door. Everything in the room was reflected in Lu Chen's eyes. The layout of this room was similar to that of Lu Chen's room in the West Wing. At the very least, the layout, furniture, and decorations were almost the same. Of course, there was no one in the room at the moment. It looked like an ordinary room. Lu Chen didn't immediately step into the room. He stood at the door, and his eyes began to sharpen, scanning every corner of the room little by little. But everything looked so normal and peaceful. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Lu Chen's eyebrows slowly furrowed, as if he was a little hesitant to enter the room to investigate further. But at this moment, Lu Chen suddenly noticed something. Unknowingly, the surroundings had become completely quiet. It was a complete silence, without a single sound. If he remembered correctly, not long ago, Atsu was still lying in the corner of the courtyard behind him, happily chewing on pieces of demon beast meat. But at this moment, not even a little sound could be heard. A wave of coldness suddenly arose from his heart and enveloped his entire body like a block of ice. But right when Lu Chen was about to abruptly turn around and put his entire body on guard, a warm voice sounded out from behind him. The voice was deep and gentle, and it even carried a trace of a smile. It was as if the voice had seen a friend and said, "Are you looking for me?" Lu Chen's body suddenly froze. The sun shone on him, and there was a warm aura. It seemed to be a good day. Lu Chen took a deep breath and turned around slowly, only to see perfected Lord Tianlan. He was still fat and burly. Just like before, he still liked to sit. He just sat on the grass in the courtyard, as if he suddenly occupied half the space of the courtyard. Atu, who had been eating in the corner of the courtyard, was now curled up in a corner, not making a sound. All the hair on his body was standing on end as he stared at the bald, fat man. He seemed extremely nervous. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then walked over. He first came to Atsu and touched its head. Atsu glanced at him and calmed down, but it was still very vigilant when it looked at Supreme Tianlong. Then Lu Chen walked to Supreme Tianlong and said, "When did you come?" "Just arrived," Perfected Lord Tianlong said with a smile and an amiable expression. Perhaps it was just as old Ma thought. He still regarded Lu Chen with special respect. Lu Chen stared at him for a while and said, "What did you say just now?" "I was looking for you," Supreme Tianlong said. "Didn't you?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment then said, "Was it you who came last night?" "Yes, I was," Supreme Tianlong admitted frankly and said, "There's something I want to ask Xiao Ma. I wanted to see you too, but it's getting late, so I didn't go over to call you." Lu Chen nodded expressionlessly and said, "No wonder. But you probably left some traces on purpose last night. Otherwise, Atsu, that stupid dog, wouldn't be able to detect your traces." Supreme Tianlong smiled and looked at the big black dog in the corner of the courtyard, saying, "Is this the dog that you always want to bring with you?" "It looks good." Lu Chen frowned and said, "It's okay. It's mainly because I've raised it for a long time and don't want to be separated again. You know, it's hard for us to completely trust someone as a shadow, and it's not easy to have a dog." Supreme Tianlong nodded and said, "You're right." Then he smiled and said, "This dog must have had some fortuitous encounter. It seems that it has awakened a demon beast bloodline and its grade is extraordinary. It seems to be a descendant of the heavenly wolf in the Great Snow Mountain?" Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat. His hands that were hanging by his side subconsciously clenched a little and then slowly loosened. Supreme Tianlong waved at him and gestured for him to come closer. Lu Chen came and sat down in front of him. Supreme Tianlong looked at him kindly and said, "How is it? Are you used to living here?" "It's pretty good. It's not like you don't know what I did in the past. What kind of life haven't I seen? Now that I have a house and food, it's not too comfortable," Lu Chen replied. "Yes." Supreme Tianlong smiled and thought for a moment before saying, "Ever since you came back, I've actually wanted to have a good chat with you. But it didn't seem appropriate at that time. Either there was an outsider or I had something urgent to do and didn't have time. Today, I finally have some spare time. How are you? Nothing urgent, right?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Of course I'm fine. But you're a soul formation perfected lord. Why do you have to talk to me so much? Just tell me to do something." Supreme Tianlong stared at him and didn't seem to be angered by his words. He just smiled gently and said, "It's been so many years and we've been apart more than together. There are even fewer opportunities for us to really chat. Sometimes, I feel that there's an indescribable barrier between us, right?" Lu Chen didn't say anything, but his hands in his sleeves slowly clenched. "Why is that?" Supreme Tianlong seemed to be a little regretful and emotional. "You're a talent that I've cultivated and I've always valued you. Of course, the task that I asked you to do more than 10 years ago was too difficult and dangerous. But you're really more outstanding than I thought and did a better job than I imagined. I'm really gratified and happy." Supreme Tianlong looked at Lu Chen sadly and said, "So, can you tell me why you seem to be a little wary of me?" "Tell me, will you?" This gentle and bald divine transformation stage perfected lord sat in front of Lu Chen like a towering mountain as he spoke to him. Chapter 402. Why was that? Lu Chen lowered his gaze and looked at the ground in front of him. A few stalks of tender grass poked their heads out of the soil, as if they were looking at the world curiously. They were completely unaware of the unimaginable hardships and suffering that existed in the distance outside. When did they become estranged? Perfected Lord Tianlong looked at him calmly, and even spoke with a hint of sincerity. This was a rare thing for a perfected lord of the divine transformation realm. From this, it could be seen that Lu Chen was indeed different from others in his eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlong said, "All these years, I don't remember lying to you about anything, whether it was when you were in the devil cult or later when you left the devil cult to hide your tracks. As long as it's something I promised you, I remember I've done it all, right? To be honest, I've never lied to you, so I've always been puzzled. Why do you feel estranged from me? At this point, perfected Lord Tianlon sighed softly and said, I know, you should be a little dissatisfied with me, but it's not too serious, at least not to the point of falling out with me. In the past few years, as long as I asked, although you would scold me from time to time such as damn Baldy, and so on, you would still help me in the end. So I think the friendship between the two of us should still exist. But it's also because of this that I want to know, why do you feel dissatisfied with me? Did I do something wrong? Perfected Lord Tianlon stared at Lu Chen and continued to ask straightforwardly. Lu Chen remained silent for a long time and perfected Lord Tianlon seemed to be exceptionally patient. He kept waiting and looked at Lu Chen quietly. After a long time, Lu Chen suddenly said, How old was I when you first met me? Perfected Lord Tianlon was stunned for a moment as if he didn't expect Lu Chen to suddenly ask this question. After pondering for a while, he said, I remember that you should only be 4 or 5 years old at that time. Lu Chen nodded slowly and said, I still remember what happened when I was young very clearly. Back then, when you found me and took me away, I was very grateful to you. I believed in you, loved you, respected you, and made up my mind to repay you. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm and it was impossible to tell if he was happy or sad. Lu Chen continued, So after you raised me up and taught me all my skills, you asked me to go to the evil cult to be that shadow. I didn't think too much and went. You've told me many things in the past, and I remember them all. He glanced at perfected Lord Tianlan and said with a smile, All living beings in the world, righteousness, getting rid of evil for the people, going through fire and water. I really believed in these words more than 10 years ago. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment. The gentle smile had already disappeared from his eyes. However, the way he looked at Lu Chen still seemed to be flickering with a reserved gentleness. He said softly, These are all righteous things. I don't know what you're thinking right now, but if you still want to believe in these words, it's fine. These words, these principles are not wrong, he said calmly. Lu Chen looked up at him and suddenly sneered. Do you believe it yourself? This time, it was perfected Lord Tianlan's turn to be silent. However, his silence was much shorter than Lu Chen's. After a while, he suddenly sighed and didn't directly answer Lu Chen's question. Instead, he said with some emotions, It's been many years since someone dared to question me like this. Lu Chen didn't say anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him for a while and suddenly smiled. Actually, it's not very important whether I believe it or not. Even if I say what I think, you might not believe me if you're prejudiced against me, right? He paused for a moment before continuing, I'm just doing what I think I should do and what I want to do. After so many years, I can only say that I have a clear conscience. Are you satisfied with this answer? Lu Chen smiled and didn't reply either. Perfected Lord Tianlan said again, I've answered your question. What about the question I asked you before? Why do you seem to be dissatisfied with me? Lu Chen was silent for a moment before saying, You've done almost everything you promised me before. I admit that. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. Lu Chen continued, When I was a shadow in the fiend cult, there were countless difficulties and dangers. However, I didn't think too much about it. At that time, I was probably thinking about completing the mission you gave me and contributing to the righteous path of the world. That was the only way I could persevere. You did well, very well. Perfected Lord Tianlan said. Later on, when I was done with my mission and returned, you arranged for me to hide in that small village. Lu Chen said indifferently. In that village, I saw the lives of some ordinary people. At a certain time in a certain year, I suddenly thought of something. Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brows slightly. What is it? Lu Chen said. Why did you choose me when you were young? Perfected Lord Tianlan hesitated for a moment before replying frankly. That's because you're talented enough. For someone of my status, if you weren't so talented, you wouldn't have attracted my attention. Lu Chen nodded. That's because I was lucky. However, after more than 10 years, when I was tortured by the black flame curse in that small village, I suddenly had a thought when I saw the children running around and playing games all day long. I wanted to ask you. Perfected Lord Tianlan asked, What do you want to ask? Lu Chen said, If I didn't go to the fiend cult to be a shadow, what would I be like now? He looked at perfected Lord Tianlan and asked calmly, Why didn't you take me in as your disciple? My talent and innate talent are clearly better than countless people. In terms of temperament, I respected you greatly and would definitely not do anything disobedient. Why didn't you give me a peaceful and smooth life? The muscles on perfected Lord Tianlan's wide cheeks seemed to twitch slightly, but he still listened to Lu Chen expressionlessly. Lu Chen retracted his gaze and looked at the grass on the ground in front of him. He said lightly, I've been to your Kunlun party and even hung around there for a long time. Therefore, I can confidently tell you that if you had taken me in as your disciple back then, I would definitely have achieved more than the bunch of trash in the Kunlun party today. If that's the case, why did you still want me to go to the fiend cult? I've never been able to figure this out. Lu Chen said. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chen quietly. After a while, he said, I asked you to go to the fiend cult because no one in the world is more suitable than you. So, you'd rather me risk my life for more than 10 years and even suffer from the black flame curse for many years after escaping? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, Your sacrifice is worth it. Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, If I told you that I didn't want to sacrifice and wanted to go to the Kunlun party to live and cultivate in peace, I think I would be stronger than the few most powerful people in the young generation of your Kunlun party. But you have never given me this opportunity. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned, as if he didn't know what to say for a moment. However, Lu Chen didn't seem to let it go. He even leaned forward and got closer to Perfected Lord Tianlan. He stared into his eyes and said slowly, So, after thinking about it, it seems that what you asked me to do is not for the righteousness of the world, but for yourself, right? Is it? Lu Chen asked. At this moment, the atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became tense after he asked that question. No one spoke again. Even Atsu, who was hiding at the side, seemed to feel something and shrank his head. Chapter 403. Perfected Lord Tianlan remained silent for a long time. During this time, he had been staring at Lu Chen. It seemed that after such a long time, it was the first time that he had discovered something about Lu Chen that he didn't know or hadn't discovered yet. His eyes looked very strange and complicated, as if there were many emotions mixed together. It was as if one could see all kinds of joy, anger, confusion, and so on. However, when one looked closely, one would feel that there was actually a deep sea in the depths of his eyes. It was deep and vast, but there was nothing in it. It was so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. Perhaps, there was no one in this world who could see through his heart. At least, Lu Chen couldn't. After a long time, Perfected Lord Tianlan slowly opened his mouth and broke the silence that had enveloped the surroundings for a long time. His tone was still calm, but the gentle and cheerful tone that he often used when talking to Lu Chen was gone. He became flat. I didn't expect that you would say such things to me. When Perfected Lord Tianlan said this, he shook his head slightly and looked disappointed. It's okay to suspect me, but it's stupid to criticize me to my face. I had high hopes for you. You did exceptionally well in the matter of the devil cult back then. Even I couldn't find any fault with you. But now, what good does it do for you to criticize me to my face? You can't even think through such a simple matter. Have you become stupid after living in seclusion for the past 10 years? When he said the last few words, Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression even became a little stern. Lu Chen smiled. It seemed that in front of this powerful and powerful perfected lord of the divine transformation realm, he really didn't have much fear. He looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan and said lazily, Why? I just said a few words and you're already anxious? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head helplessly again. I'm not anxious. I'm just a little disappointed with the way you handled this matter. Lu Chen suddenly said, If you don't like me, then just send me away. A hint of anger flashed across Perfected Lord Tianlan's face. After a moment of silence, he stood up abruptly. However, just as he was about to walk to the door, he suddenly paused and looked back at Lu Chen with a frown. Then, the anger on his face suddenly dissipated and he slowly said with a smile, Why do I suddenly feel that you've been trying to provoke me intentionally or unintentionally? Lu Chen's hands hung by his side. He slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves, but his palms were already covered in cold sweat. However, this did not affect his expression. He lowered his head slightly and put on a submissive expression again. There is no such thing. Looking at Lu Chen, Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression gradually turned gentle again. There seemed to be a few more emotions in his eyes. There was a hint of mockery, but also a hint of gratification and happiness.
Where's little Ma?
Perfected Lord Tianlon suddenly changed the topic, as if he did not want to continue talking about this with Lu Chen. Lu Chen secretly heaved a sigh of relief, but his expression did not change much. He said, he went to Fuyunji to look for Hall Master Shueying for money.
For money? Perfected Lord Tianlon thought for a moment and then nodded.
Oh, it's that matter. Shueying did mention it to me. I say, aren't the two of you a little too greedy? Although that matter might cost a lot of money, isn't it a little too much to ask for so much all at once? No wonder Shueying came to complain to me indignantly. Lu Chen's expression did not change. He quickly continued, it's easier to do things with money. Only then can things be done quickly and well. Perfected Lord Tianlon sneered and said, nonsense. You can't fool anyone with this. Who came up with the idea of this price? You or little Ma? Lu Chen did not hesitate to shift the blame to Perfected Lord Tianlon. Ma Xiaoyun said it.
Him.
Perfected Lord Tianlon looked a little doubtful. He took another look at Lu Chen and said, why do I feel that it's more like your idea? Lu Chen said seriously, I've been living a poor life for so many years. I've long gotten used to it. Money is also a worldly possession to me. I don't care about it. Perfected Lord Tianlon seemed a little stunned. He said, you're that nice.
Lu Chen nodded solemnly and said, yes.
Perfected Lord Tianlon stared at him for a moment and suddenly laughed. He then sighed and said, I understand. I'll talk to Shueying later. I'll give you 10,000. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, Old Ma asked for 30,000. That's more like it. Perfected Lord Tianlon snorted and said, Fuyunji's money doesn't come from the wind. What's more, there are so many eyes in Zhengxianmeng staring at us. They can't wait to take back every spirit stone we spend and check it carefully. We're already giving you face by giving you 10,000, okay? Okay, thank you. Lu Chen immediately changed his stance and nodded to express his thanks. Perfected Lord Tianlon was stunned for a moment and then shook his head with a smile. He then pondered for a moment and took out a piece of white paper from his bosom and handed it to Lu Chen. Lu Chen took it and roughly glanced at it. He saw that there were many words written on the white paper. The contents recorded the names of many people and their respective identities, residences, personalities, and even the level of their cultivation. What's this? Lu Chen looked up and asked Perfected Lord Tianlon. Perfected Lord Tianlon said, in the past few years, we've specially investigated a group of people. We've gotten rid of those who have solid evidence of colluding with the devil cult. But there are still some people we're not sure about. We have some suspicions but we don't have any evidence, so it's really hard to deal with them. Since you're here to do that, you might be able to investigate from among these people as well. Lu Chen glanced at the name list on the white paper and then nodded and said, I'll go find them. Okay. Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at him one last time and then turned to leave. From the beginning to the end, they never mentioned the barrier that they once argued about, as if the problem had never existed. Old Ma only came back in the afternoon when it was almost dusk. He looked very happy. When he entered the door, he had a calm expression on his face as if nothing had happened. At least in the eyes of outsiders, there was nothing unusual. However, when he walked into the house and closed the door, the serious expression on his face immediately disappeared. Not only was he full of joy, he even strode to the backyard while laughing and shouting, Lu Chen, come out quickly. I have great news to tell you. Lu Chen, who was sitting in the courtyard, turned around and looked very calm. He said with a smile, so happy? It seems to be good news. Old Ma nodded repeatedly. When he was about to say something, he suddenly looked around and said with a little surprise, Hey, where's Atsu? He just ate a big piece of meat and went back to sleep. All right, he really is a dog that sleeps better than a pig. Old Ma walked over with a smile and sat opposite Lu Chen. He said, Quick guess, what did I get from looking for Shueying? Lu Chen thought for a while and said thoughtfully, She agreed to give you money? Old Ma snorted and said with a smug look on his face, Isn't that obvious? The question is, how many exactly? Why don't you guess? Quick. Lu Chen also laughed and said, About 5,000. After all, if we ask for a sky-high price, Shueying will have to pay us back fiercely. Old Ma slapped his thigh and said proudly, "Wrong. More than that." Lu Chen smiled with a hint of surprise and said, "More than that? Amazing, Old Ma, you can even deal with Shui Ying. Quick, tell me how much did you give?" 10,000. Old Ma said proudly. "Amazing, amazing." Lu Chen laughed and said, "We're rich." Chapter 404. After nightfall, Old Ma, who had gotten the biggest windfall in his life, finally went back to his room to sleep contentedly. During the period of returning just now, Old Ma pulled Lu Chen and talked a lot. He showed great longing and yearning for the decadent life that was about to unfold in the immortal city. Old Ma's attitude surprised Lu Chen a little. Although 10,000 spirit stones was indeed a huge sum of money, and most of the poor rogue cultivators with no family background might not see so much money in their lifetime, Old Ma was someone who had been with a soul formation cultivator for many years. He also had the support of Zhengxian Meng and Fuyunji, the most powerful hall in Zhengxian Meng. No matter what, he shouldn't be so excited, right? Usually, when we were in King Shutang village, you were always calmer. Old Ma snorted at Lu Chen's words and refuted them without hesitation. True Lord Tianlan is naturally one of the top immortals in the world, but I have been with him for a long time. Our identities are too different. I'm just a small spy. What special benefits can I get? Zhengxian Meng is indeed a towering tree, but few people in Zhengxian Meng know my identity, okay? What benefits can I get? I have a good relationship with Fuyunji, but recently you've been giving hall leader Shuang a hard time and asked me to go over to ask for money. Cutting off people's income is like killing their parents. Do you know that? She has already chased me out once. Now I'm very worried that I might die mysteriously on the side of the road with no one to collect my corpse. So after saying so much, I'm very miserable. I'm basically a rogue cultivator with no family background. In this situation, it's not strange for me to be excited when I see this huge sum of money, right? Lu Chen thought about it and nodded. Yes, you're right. I didn't think so at first, but after hearing what you said, I suddenly feel that these 10,000 spirit stones are too good. It's worth celebrating. Old Ma laughed out loud, and his excitement was obvious. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said, "Then tomorrow we will go to spend." No, tomorrow we will go to work. He quickly corrected his expression and said seriously. Lu Chen said, "All right." Old Ma chuckled, then turned around and walked towards his bedroom. However, after taking a few steps, he suddenly turned around to look at Lu Chen and said, "Hey, you seem a little strange." Lu Chen's heart skipped a beat, but he smiled and said calmly, "What's strange? I'm fine." Old Ma looked him up and down, and a trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. Lu Chen was secretly shocked. He thought to himself, does this guy really have some hidden skills? How can he detect traces of perfected Lord Tianlan's previous visit? Old Ma observed him for a while and suddenly said, "Lu Chen, why don't you look excited at all?" Lu Chen was startled and said, "Excited? Do I need to be excited?" Old Ma said, "I remember when you lived with me in King Shutang village, you often scolded me for a few pieces of spirit stones. Why don't you have any reaction now that we have this huge sum of 10,000 spirit stones?" Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I thought you were going to say something. I was bored in that stupid village, so I was just playing with you. It's just 10,000 spirit stones, I don't care about it." Just. Old Ma paused and looked at him with disdain. He shook his head and said, "Pretentious, you just like to pretend." With a disdainful look on his face, he obviously did not believe Lu Chen's words at all. He then walked back slowly. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh. After watching him return to his room, he looked up at the darkening sky and returned to his own room. There was a candle in the bedroom. Lu Chen lit it and sat down at the table. Atsu was lying on the floor and sleeping soundly. Lu Chen couldn't help but smile when he saw its appearance. He walked over and rubbed its head. Its fur was soft and it gave off a warm aura. At that moment, his eyes suddenly became a little blank, as if he was looking at an unknown place. Even his voice became a little hollow. In this room, there was only himself and Atu, who was sleeping soundly. After a long time, he could only hear him mumbling softly to himself. From day to night, the words spoken by people are mixed with lies. "Atu, Can you tell if I'm telling the truth or not? His eyes finally fell on the candle flame that was burning silently. The faint yellow light was reflected in his pupils, burning silently. I've been a shadow since I was a child, and I've been a shadow for too long, Atsu. Atsu was sleeping soundly. Maybe it was dreaming of something delicious, because its mouth was making a series of grunting sounds. Lu Chen looked down at it, his eyes calm and gentle, and said softly, Atsu, I seem to have gotten used to lying. I'm always lying. I'm always pretending to be something else. Sometimes, I don't even know what my real face looks like.
He slightly lowered his head, and the candlelight fell on the side of his face, making it look dark and uncertain.
So.
His voice seemed to be a little sad, a little emotional, a little disappointed, and yearning, as if he was thinking of something that happened a long time ago.
If only Exine was still here, right, Atsu? She's so stupid, I don't even need to lie to her, hee. He chuckled softly, but at the end, there was a bit of sadness in his voice. He quietly said so. The next morning, when the sun was shining, Old Ma woke up from his dream early. After tidying up, he went out and walked to Lu Chen's bedroom. He knocked on the door and shouted loudly, Hey, wake up, wake up! Today's weather is so good, it's a good day to go. To do something. After a while, a few grumbling and somewhat annoyed barks came from behind the closed door. Then, a series of footsteps approached from afar. After a creak, Lu Chen opened the door and stood there.
He even yawned and said, What are you doing?
The sun just rose, isn't it? It's too early for you to be up. What do you mean by early? Old Ma glared at him, showing a deep hatred for Lu Chen's lazy habits.
He said seriously, We have to do something big for the sake of the world, for justice and for the sake of the world.
How can we be lazy? Quickly wash up, change your clothes, and tidy up. We'll go out to do something. Lu Chen was a little surprised. He looked up and down at Old Ma and said, It's only been one night. Why do you seem to be different from the past 10 years? It's like you've changed into a different person. Old Ma spat and said, I used to hang out with you in that god-forsaken mountain village. I didn't have any motivation at all. But now it's different. We're in a mortal city. This is a great opportunity. Lu Chen interrupted, The main thing is that you have money, right?
This is when... No, the main thing is that you have the opportunity to do something big.
Old Ma corrected Lu Chen's wrong point of view in time. Lu Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand and said, Okay, wait for me, I'll be out soon. Hurry up. Old Ma paced back and forth in the yard. After a while, he saw Lu Chen coming out of the room. He poked his head out and glanced at Lu Chen's bedroom. Seeing that Atsu was still lying there with sleepy eyes, he couldn't help but say, If we go out like this for a day and leave Atsu alone at home, will there be an accident?
It'll be fine.
Lu Chen walked to the storeroom, opened the door, and brought back a large piece of demon beast meat. He put it next to Atsu, then walked out and said to Old Ma, It's growing recently, so it can't wait to eat, drink, and sleep every day. It won't want to go out. Ha! My goodness, it's still growing at this age? Old Ma exclaimed. Yes. Lu Chen looked back and said faintly, I only found out last night. It seems that Atsu is going to advance again. Chapter 405. Advancement? What advancement? Old Ma was obviously startled, and asked in astonishment, I've never heard of a dog advancing? Lu Chen thought for a moment, and said, that's true. What I said just now wasn't quite right. You can think of Atsu's situation as, it's recently growing again. Old Ma was taken aback, and said, My goodness, you mean, because it recently ate the meat of these demon beasts, this big dog will continue to grow? Lu Chen smiled, and pulled him out. At the same time he smiled and said, I'm guessing it's probably like this. Old Ma was pulled out by him, and as he walked, he looked back and said, What kind of dog is this? I've never seen a dog that can grow so big. Although the two of them had been bickering and ridiculing each other before, it was probably because they had known each other for a long time, and their friendship was too good, so they were very close. However, after leaving the house, Old Ma quickly adjusted his position, and said to Lu Chen, The thing we're going to do, you're in charge. I'm here to help you, and then I'll take care of the money. No matter what you spend in the future, I'll pay for it. Lu Chen nodded, and the two of them walked forward together. After crossing the horse-washing bridge, they walked into the bustling streets of Immortal City. There were all kinds of people coming and going on the streets, but whether it was Lu Chen or Old Ma, they didn't care. But somewhere along the way, Old Ma suddenly pointed to a place, and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "Look, isn't that the nightclub we went to last time?" Lu Chen glanced over there, and sure enough, it was the place they went to that night. But it was daytime, and there were indeed few people there. Even the door was closed. It seemed like it was the same as most other places, closed during the day. "You sure remember it well. You've only been there once, but you remember it so well," Lu Chen said. Old Ma waved his hand and said with a smile, "There's no such thing. It's just that I happened to see the white tiger statue outside the house from the window one night. The angle and distance were about the same as today, so I recognized it at a glance." In the Immortal City, the statues of the four great holy beasts were so tall and majestic that one could see at least one statue in most places. Generally speaking, these majestic statues of unknown origins had become the center of the various districts in the Immortal City over the years. The closer one was to the statue, the livelier it was. Of course, there were casinos, nightclubs, and other places to squander money. It was even said that there was an unwritten custom that the closer the nightclubs and shops were to the Colossus, the higher the grade. Of course, the amount of money needed to make a trip in would also increase. Lu Chen smiled and shook his head. He patted the shoulder of Old Ma, who was still sighing and looking at the nightclub building, and continued to walk forward. After Old Ma caught up, Lu Chen suddenly said in a low voice, "Old Ma, there's something I've always wanted to ask you." Old Ma glanced at him and said, "What is it? Say it." This time, it was the damn Baldy who found me and wanted me to help him do something. I decided to help him in the end. Lu Chen walked side by side with him and said softly at the same time, "But you're different. I don't think there's a need for you to get involved." Old Ma frowned and said, "What do you mean?" "But this is indeed something I want to do. No one forced me to do it." Lu Chen nodded slightly. After a moment of silence he said, "Didn't the damn Baldy say anything to you?" Old Ma said, "No, Master was just like usual, telling me what to do and what to do." Lu Chen put his hands behind his back and seemed to be deep in thought. At the same time he said lightly, "Today is different from the past. In the past, you almost never did anything like directly dealing with the lunatics of the evil cult. Why do you have to come and ask for trouble? According to what I said, after you sent me to Immortal City, you can actually retire." Old Ma furrowed his brows and said, "Retire? This kind of thing doesn't seem dangerous. But once you go deeper, the sacred tree is the most important and fundamental source of faith in the history of the evil cult. Anyone who wants to destroy it is almost certain to be the mortal enemy of the evil cult. It's extremely dangerous." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said in a low voice, "Actually, you don't have to work so hard to run with me. Maybe it's better to go back and enjoy the rest of your life." Old Ma hesitated for a moment and suddenly laughed. Then he said, "Actually, I have thought about these things before. But Master told me that he hoped I can help you in the end. And I myself actually have the same thought. After all, I have lived with you in that broken mountain village for 10 years. I can't let you be caught by those lunatics so easily. And there are some things that you have to be careful of." Lu Chen didn't seem to understand Old Ma's words. After walking a few steps forward, he smiled and said to him, "Be careful of what?" Old Ma laughed and said, "Be careful of the evil cult." "Where are we going?" After walking around the white tiger statue with Lu Chen, Old Ma couldn't help but ask Lu Chen, "It seems that the two of us have been walking around this statue for the whole morning." Lu Chen looked indifferent, glanced at him and said, "You know there is a slang in Jianghu called observing one's words and body language, right? I also want to see if there is a possibility that the people here are madmen from the evil faction who sneaked in." Old Ma didn't believe it and said, "There are people everywhere on the street. You can recognize them with your eyes." "I won't believe it even if you beat me to death." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm just saying." Old Ma seemed to have walked a little too much. He simply sat down on a carved bench by the side of the road. At the same time he said to Lu Chen, "I say, we have mentioned before that you are in charge of this matter. Since we have been walking for so long, what are you going to do? The ancients have an old saying, Sharpening the knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood.
Lu Chen said calmly to old Ma. When you were complaining about me along the way, I had already remembered the direction of the nearby streets.
In the future, if we are betrayed or hunted down, at least we can escape more smoothly, right? Old Ma was speechless. After a moment he muttered, "We haven't even fought and we already want to escape and be killed. I can't do this job anymore."
As he spoke, he moved closer and whispered, "Do you have a clue or not?"
Lu Chen didn't look at him. His eyes seemed to be looking at an unknown place. At the same time he whispered, "I have a list of the most suspicious people in Immortal City over the years. Including the people in Zhengxianmeng."
Old Ma was obviously surprised and whispered, "There's such a thing."
"Then which place and who are you going to pick later?" Lu Chen said with a smile, "I haven't found them yet. Let's take our time to find them."
But,
he paused for a moment, then continued, "But I should have an idea of the people we are going to find today. But this is nothing to show off.
I have always wanted to ask you, do ordinary people like us have the chance to meet those high and mighty perfected deity transformation?"
Old Ma was shocked. When he looked at Lu Chen's face again, there didn't seem to be anything strange.
He quickly pulled him to a secluded place and said, "If you want to meet our perfected deity transformation, just say the word." Before he finished speaking, he heard Lu Chen suddenly ask, "What if I want to meet other perfected deity transformation in this immortal city? Is there any way?"
Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but nodded and said, "Yes." Chapter 406.
As for the others, they have nothing to do with you, right?
This time, Old Ma seemed to be a little more afraid. Not only did he not say their names, but he did not even dare to mention the words, "Soul Formation Perfected Cultivator." Lu Chen said, "Of course not. I was just asking."
Old Ma snorted and said, "What a coincidence.
I've been with you for more than 10 years. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? You must have something. Tell me, why do you want to meet those people?" Lu Chen did not answer.
Instead, he laughed and said, "I didn't expect you to know me so well."
"Shouldn't I?" Old Ma asked back. Lu Chen said, "Of course. After all, we've lived together in that broken village of Qingshitang for 10 years. But I really didn't expect you to be so meticulous. If we have a falling out in the future, I'm afraid I won't be able to escape as long as you're here." Old Ma's expression changed slightly.
Then he laughed and said, "Then you have to be careful.
Don't walk right into the trap." Lu Chen smiled and looked at Old Ma. "Yes, so when it really comes to that, I'll have to find a way to kill you and then run for my life." The smile on Old Ma's face froze. He looked at Lu Chen and could not smile for a moment. The atmosphere between the two of them froze for a moment. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly laughed out loud. He reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder. He said with a smile, "Just a casual sentence and you're scared silly?" Old Ma swallowed his saliva. After a while he laughed dryly and said, "Nonsense. Brother, don't talk nonsense. I don't know about others, but you, the shadow. I'm really scared." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma, and the frivolous look on his face gradually disappeared. As if he had thought of something, he straightened his expression and nodded to Old Ma. He said seriously, "Don't worry. I've always treated you as my best brother for so many years." Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then his expression relaxed and he smiled. Sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on the huge white tiger statue. The strange tiger eyes seemed to be staring in this direction. "Let's cut the crap. We were supposed to get down to business, but we got sidetracked," Old Ma said to Lu Chen. "Let's get down to business first. Who are you going to see today?" "A gardener," Lu Chen replied. "What did a gardener do?" As the name suggested, they were people who took care of flowers and plants. The immortal city was huge, had a large population, and was known as the most prosperous place in the world. Naturally, there were all kinds of needs, and flowers and plants were one of them. Of course, compared with the nightclub, which was an ancient business that humans instinctively did since ancient times, the gardener's business was still much smaller. Most of the time, there might only be 1 or 2 gardeners in an ordinary city. However, there were still many gardeners in the immortal city. After all, in addition to helping people plant flowers and plants,
There were also many gardeners who directly opened their own shops and sold precious flowers to the public. The flower shop that Lu Chen and Old Ma found was in the White Tiger district. In fact, it wasn't too far from the place where they rested before. It was probably near the territory of the White Tiger statue's tail. Soon, they went around 2 streets and saw the front of the flower shop. 1,000 Flowers Hall? Looking at the flower shop across the street from a distance, Old Ma frowned slightly and suddenly said to Lu Chen, "If this shop was opened in Kunwu City, it would have been torn down 30 or 50 times, right?"
Ha! What do you mean?
Lu Chen asked with some surprise. Old Ma said, "This name is obviously disrespectful to the Kunlun party." Lu Chen was a little puzzled. He looked at the 1,000 Flowers Hall a few more times, but he still didn't see any clues. He said, "I don't think so. I don't think this name offends the Kunlun party." Old Ma smiled and didn't say anything. He just waved his hand and said proudly, "You go back and think about it carefully. If you really can't think of anything, you can ask me again at night." "You're actually keeping me in suspense." Lu Chen glared at Old Ma with some dissatisfaction. Old Ma didn't care and walked towards the flower shop with a smile. He also beckoned to Lu Chen to follow him. Lu Chen curled his lips. It was unknown whether he was cursing or not. He then walked to Old Ma's side. He heard Old Ma say in a low voice, "The person you're looking for is in here?" Lu Chen looked ahead and said, "Yes, but I'll say it again. All the people on that list haven't been proved whether they're good or evil. You should be careful later and don't act recklessly. It'll be bad if you wrongly accuse an innocent person." Old Ma casually replied, "It doesn't matter. In any case, we're doing great things, so we don't care about the lives of ordinary people." Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped, but he stood still on the spot. Old Ma immediately stopped and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen looked at him silently. After a long silence he said, "What you said just now was not good. Don't say it like that in the future." He seemed to sigh and said in a low voice, "Ordinary people are still people." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and smiled, "You're right. In fact, I just said it casually. Speaking of which, compared with those real big shots, we are also ordinary people." Hearing his self-mocking tone, Lu Chen also smiled and walked past him. At the same time, he laughed in a low voice and said, "Come on, do you think I don't know you? As long as you safely retire in the future, you will definitely have enough backup plans to live the rest of your life comfortably." Old Ma was shocked and stared at Lu Chen. "Damn it! You actually know me so well." "It seems that before I retire, I have to think of a way to kill you first. Otherwise, there will be endless troubles in the future." Lu Chen laughed. When the two of them walked into the 1,000 Flower Hall, they were greeted by clusters of delicate and alluring flowers, and pots of gorgeous flowers were placed in the shop. The red flowers and green leaves were extremely charming, causing one to be unable to take it all in. The air was filled with a dense fragrance of flowers, causing one to be intoxicated by the smell. Lu Chen and Old Ma were actually people with rich experience. However, it was the first time that they suddenly saw so many flowers in one place. This feeling was different from the feeling of planting 1 or 2 precious flowers in those courtyards. Vaguely, there was a feeling of a forest of flowers in front of them. It seemed to set off the extraordinariness of the shop owner. However, unlike other shops, this extraordinary boss didn't rush to greet customers as soon as he saw them. Lu Chen and Old Ma waited at the door for a while and admired many pots of beautiful flowers, but no one came to greet them. At this time, both Lu Chen and Old Ma felt that something was wrong. They looked at each other and Old Ma muttered, "Something seems wrong. I've never seen a person who does business like this." Lu Chen's gaze swept across the 1,000 Flowers Hall and looked ahead, but he said, "No, I've seen it before." Old Ma was startled and said in surprise, "What? You've seen it before?" "Yes, I have." Lu Chen seemed to have sensed something and began to walk into the flower shop. At the same time, he continued to say to Old Ma, for example, there was a shop in Kunwu City called Black Hill Pavilion. The boss there was almost the same as this one. 3 days of fishing, 2 days of drying nets, and 1 day of sleeping. Old Ma said, "You don't make venomous accusations." Just as he was about to argue, Lu Chen suddenly grabbed Old Ma's arm and his expression darkened. Old Ma was startled and his expression also slightly changed. In the depths of this flower shop, The smell of blood began to come from the fragrance of flowers. After turning around a pot of flowers, they saw the owner of the flower shop they were looking for. It was a dead man, nailed to the wall by a long sword. Blood stained the white wall under his body.
Chapter 407.
The smell of blood in the air mixed with the rich fragrance of the flowers. The bright red blood and the enchanting flowers complemented each other. Near the corpse, one could even see some blood splashing on the petals. Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other and saw the surprise and shock in each other's eyes. However, this was certainly not a good time to be in a daze, so after a moment, Old Ma immediately said, "Let's go." With that, he was about to leave the flower shop, but he was pulled back by Lu Chen. He heard Lu Chen say in a low voice, "Don't worry, I'll go take a look." Old Ma hesitated for a moment and looked outside the shop. It was quiet at the entrance, as if the outside world still knew nothing about what happened in Thousand Flowers Hall. He gritted his teeth and slowly nodded. Lu Chen walked over to the corpse that had been nailed to the wall. The corpse was in an extremely wretched state. From the appearance, it should be a man in his 40s or 50s. He was not tall and was slightly fat. There was nothing particularly eye-catching about him. However, when Lu Chen walked to the side of the corpse and gently moved the dead man's head, he saw fear and despair on the face. His gaze lingered on the face for a moment, and then he looked down, scanning the entire body of the dead man, especially his hands. "How is it?" This voice came from Old Ma, who was standing at the back and looking at the door from time to time with his brows furrowed.
"Did you find anything?" Lu Chen's gaze swept over the wounds on the dead man's body, especially the fatal wound on his chest. At the same time, it was the sword that nailed his body to the wall. The blade was sharp, the sword was fierce, and the sword pierced through the heart with no intention of leaving the opponent a way out. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen turned his head to look at the blood on the ground and the surrounding flowers. He then stood up and walked back to Old Ma's side. "How is it?" Old Ma asked again. Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, "This person should be the boss of Thousand Flowers Hall, Hua Danyuo, that we came to look for today." Old Ma frowned and said, "Is there a mistake?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "There shouldn't be any mistake. This dead man's appearance, figure, and some of the small characteristics on his body all match the information I received." Old Ma wanted to say something but hesitated. He signaled to Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "No matter what, it's not safe here. Let's go first." Lu Chen turned around to look at the miserably dead boss of the Thousand Flowers Hall, then silently nodded his head. The two of them turned around and walked out. Pots of fresh flowers and green grass blocked the disgusting scene behind them. Even the smell of blood was covered by the fragrance of flowers. When they walked onto the main street again, bright sunlight descended from the sky and sprinkled on their bodies. It suddenly made one feel as if they had been reborn from the ashes, and also as if in that instant, they felt as if they had returned from hell to the warm human world. There were naturally pedestrians on the main street, and there were many of them. People came and went, and it was extremely bustling. After all, this place was a gathering of shops, and could be considered a relatively prosperous area in the Immortal City's White Tiger District. However, it seemed like no one noticed Lu Chen and Old Ma. It seemed like no one even gave them a second glance. Old Ma let out a light breath, and then walked forward shoulder to shoulder with Lu Chen. From the outside, the expressions on their faces had recovered in the shortest amount of time possible. At least from the outside, it seemed like they had just casually walked into the most ordinary flower shop and strolled around. After not finding any goods that satisfied them, they continued walking down the street. No one could have imagined that at that moment just now, they had come into close contact with a dead person in a cluster of flowers. Is there something fishy about this? After walking out of this long street, and at the same time making sure that there were no hidden sentries or secret agents following behind them, Old Ma still couldn't wait to ask this question to Lu Chen. Lu Chen's expression also looked somewhat solemn. After hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "It still feels somewhat fishy. I only found out about this person's whereabouts yesterday, and only one night later, I came to find him. How could it be such a coincidence that he suddenly died?" Old Ma wasn't interested in his sigh at all. He was only very concerned about the scene he saw just now. He said in a low voice, "This matter. I mean the list you got yesterday, who is on it? Also besides you, Who else knows the name on it? Lu Chen turned back to take a look, and saw that the Thousand Flowers Hall was about to disappear from their line of sight at this moment. The dead person just now was indeed the boss of the Thousand Flowers Hall, Hua Duanyuo. No matter what characteristics he had, just now he matched. The only thing he probably didn't expect was that when he saw this person, he was already a dead person. At the same time, old Ma was frowning beside him, looking at him with a somewhat solemn expression. He said, "These things can you tell me? Also, the person who gave you this list, who is it?" A trace of a complicated expression suddenly flitted across his fat face. He leaned forward slightly and said, "Could it be Lord Supreme himself?" Lu Chen didn't answer, nor did he deny it. He just looked at old Ma and smiled. Then he walked in front of old Ma and said in a low voice, "I can't say this matter." That list was of course the one that true Lord Tianlan gave him yesterday. But from the beginning to the end, true Lord Tianlan didn't specifically warn Lu Chen. The perfunctory words he wanted to say at this moment were probably because he had no other choice. "Well, since you won't say, I won't ask." Facing Lu Chen, old Ma was as casual as an ordinary person, frighteningly straightforward. However, he clearly had no intention of backing down. Instead, he asked Lu Chen in a roundabout way, "If you have something that you can't say, I naturally won't pursue it. However, there's at least one thing that we still have to investigate, right?" Lu Chen frowned and said, "What is it?" Old Ma sneered and said, "Who is the most likely to do it?" Although old Ma didn't say the specific enemy, but Lu Chen still understood. After thinking for a moment he said, "I think it's the evil sex killers." Old Ma snorted coldly. A trace of murderous intent appeared in his eyes. But this trace of murderous intent only appeared for a while before it was intercepted by Lu Chen and said, "As far as I know, that family just now could be the evil sex spies lurking here. But the people in Zhengxianmeng can't be completely sure. I heard that they only moved here recently." Old Ma's eyes turned. Suddenly he used his hand to pull Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "Could it be that the evil sect sent them to test you?" Lu Chen sneered and said, "This really seems like a mad dog." While speaking, he himself shook his head and said, "This matter is hard to say." This matter was not the only one that was hard to say in this world. When Lu Chen and old Ma went out for the first time and returned to their house empty-handed, they suddenly saw the spirited bald Supreme lying on the grass in the yard, and beside him was Atsu, who seemed to have a good impression of this fat bald man. The man and the dog were playing, which turned out to be very interesting. During this time, Supreme Tianlan even shouted to old Ma and said, "Come and play, I have something to say to you." Old Ma laughed, but there was no smile on Lu Chen's face. His eyes only fell on Atsu. After a while he said, "Damn Baldy, put Atsu down." Supreme Tianlan smiled and said, "Okay." While speaking, he suddenly stretched out a hand to grab Atsu's neck and directly threw him over. With a gust of wind, the huge dog had already arrived in front of Lu Chen. Chapter 408. When they left Kunlun Mountain a few years ago, Atsu's strength was already very strong after its advancement. Especially after returning from the southern wilderness with Lu Chen, passing through the Great Snow Mountain and meeting Father Sirius, Lu Chen could feel that the strength of this stupid dog had risen day by day. A dog that liked to eat the meat of powerful demonic beasts, how could it possibly be weak? If its physique was slightly weaker, it would be directly burned to death by the essence qi in the meat of the monsters. But now this Atsu, which could fight with most powerful monsters, seemed to have lost all its strength in the hands of Supreme Tianlan. It could not even control its body. It flew into the air involuntarily, then waved its hands and feet as if it was out of control. It barked wildly and smashed down on Lu Chen. Lu Chen's face changed slightly and he took half a step back. There was a moment of hesitation on his face, but he gritted his teeth and straightened his body in an instant. He stretched out his hands to catch the huge body of Atsu. Old Ma, who was standing aside, suddenly turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but saw that Atsu was flying at an extraordinary speed. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of him. A gust of wind swept by and actually made old Ma swallow his words. With a muffled bang, Lu Chen had already caught the huge body of Atsu. At the same time, his face turned pale and then red. He could not stand still and took 3 steps back. Then he suddenly heard a muffled groan. His body shook a few times and finally stopped abruptly.
On the ground under his feet, there were 2 more inch-deep footprints on the original green grass in the courtyard, which was particularly dazzling in this courtyard.
A black chi lit up and went out in the depths of Lu Chen's pupils. He lowered his head slightly and calmed his panting chest. At this moment, Old Ma stood there with his eyes wide open and seemed to be at a loss. After a moment, it was Supreme Tianlan who suddenly smiled and waved his hand, saying, "Xiao Ma, take this dog to play for a while. I have something to say to Lu Chen."
"Yes."
Old Ma hurriedly agreed and then walked to Lu Chen's side. He first reached out to touch the black dog, who had stood on the ground again but was obviously still in shock. At the same time, his eyes glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen also looked at him. Their eyes met in mid-air for a moment. There seemed to be complicated and indescribable emotions in Old Ma's eyes.
Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then nodded in an imperceptible manner.
Old Ma seemed to be relieved and quickly hugged Atsu. Then he laughed and said, "Come with me, Atsu. Today, I will pick a piece of meat for you that is bigger than before." As he spoke, he took Atsu and walked forward. Atsu seemed to care about that piece of demonic beast meat, but after taking 2 steps, it stopped and looked back at Lu Chen with a trace of doubt in its eyes. Lu Chen nodded at it and then made a gesture with his hand. Only then did Atsu seem to be relieved and followed Old Ma. Lu Chen walked to the front of Perfected Lord Tianlan and then sat down. After that, he remained quiet and silent. His reaction was different from that of most people. At this time, ordinary people would at least ask Perfected Lord Tianlan a few questions, such as, "What do you want to do here?" Or "Why are you here?" But Lu Chen did not say a word. He did not speak, but Perfected Lord Tianlan finally spoke first. It seemed that this powerful Perfected Lord Tianlan, who could even be ranked in the top 5 in the world, really looked at Lu Chen in a different light. Not only was he not angry at his somewhat cold attitude, but he also had a gentle and kind expression on his face. This dog is not bad, mainly because of its pure bloodline. If there is a little more opportunity in the future, it may be able to go further. As he spoke, he smiled and asked Lu Chen, "Where did you catch this black dog from?" Lu Chen looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan's tall and burly body, feeling as if he was a child in front of this person. However, his tone did not reveal any such thoughts, and he only replied calmly, "The land of chaos." It was true that the land of chaos was extremely dangerous, but the land of chaos was vast and filled with all kinds of dangers. Since ancient times, there had not been a single clan or sect that had the ambition and boldness to secretly plot and control the entire land of chaos. Therefore, most of the time, as long as one could survive in the land of chaos, it was common for them to brag to the people around them after they escaped. However, it seemed that Perfected Lord Tianlan did not intend to pursue this matter further. It was as if he had just casually found an excuse to speak to Lu Chen. At this moment, he was sitting in front of Lu Chen, his eyes deep and bright. He said indifferently, "I have thought about it for a long time, and I feel that there is a need for us to truly have an open conversation. I want you to be my disciple, to become my successor. I have said this before, but today, when we are alone here, I want to say this to you formally." Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression was calm, as if he was already familiar with these words. On the other hand, Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, and his expression became somewhat complicated. Perfected Lord Tianlan then said, "I've thought about it carefully after I went back. I feel that I do owe you a little in the past, especially when I took you in as my successor. I didn't do a good job." Hearing this, Lu Chen's expression became even more complicated. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not seem to care about his expression at all, and only continued to speak. "Therefore, I came here today to clarify this matter with you. You are my most favorite and most trusted disciple and successor. Although it has not been announced to the public due to various reasons, this thought has existed in my heart for many years and has never changed." Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, but very quickly, he suddenly changed the topic and his voice changed from gentle to somewhat cold. Lu Chen was very familiar with this Perfected Lord of the Divine Transformation realm. After all, he was raised by Perfected Lord Tianlan since he was young. However, what he heard next still made him subconsciously shocked. "I have no children, so in the future, almost everything I have will be handed over to you." Lu Chen's mind raced and he almost blurted out the question of, How is he doing now? From Perfected Lord Tianlon. Fortunately, he managed to restrain himself.
Perfected Lord Tianlon said slowly, I think you should also understand that if you want to become my successor, there will be more than just killing and fighting. There are a large number of people under me. If you use them well, you will naturally become a superior person. If you don't. At this point, he suddenly stopped talking. Lu Chen raised his head and looked at him. After a while, he heard Perfected Lord Tianlon say, I don't know how many foundations and connections I have. If you can't convince them, they won't lower their heads to you. Do you understand?
Yes, Lu Chen replied. All right, since you plan to take over my position in the future, I have something to ask your opinion on and see how you plan to deal with it.
Go ahead, Lu Chen said.
Actually, there are still many factions and sects that refuse to submit to Zhengxian Meng. Encountering such people often means an extremely fierce fight.
However, according to the information from the spies this time, there are 5 extremely powerful devils who have been going against Zhengxian Meng for a long time.
Recently, they took the initiative to come to us and want to accept the imperial edict. Lu Chen frowned and said, That doesn't sound bad. Perfected Lord Tianlon smiled and said, It does sound good, but then things got out of hand. Among the 5 devils, 3 of them don't want to live in the martial world anymore and want to retire, but the remaining 2 are still ambitious and want to make a career. If it were you, what would you do?
Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at Lu Chen and asked.
Chapter 409. Can you explain it more clearly? Lu Chen thought for a moment and asked again. Okay.
Perfected Lord Tianlon seemed to be very straightforward and said, The reason for the whole thing is like this. Our Zhengxian Meng has been developing for 1,000 years and is now the strongest sect alliance in the vast cultivation world of the Divine Continent.
There's no need to hide this and there's no need to be polite.
However, the world is big and there are many heroes. You can say that our Zhengxian Meng can cover the sky with one hand, but outside of Zhengxian Meng, there are actually many sects and powerful cultivators that are not weak.
And the Bloodwing sect is such a sect. The Bloodwing sect is a cultivation sect, but there are actually only 5 people in the sect. They are called the Bloodwing 5 Devils. They don't take in disciples and travel the world in groups. These 5 people have the surnames Zhang, Zhu, Zhou, Rui and Li.
Their talents and cultivation are all considered good, and they have made extraordinary achievements in the past few years and made a name for themselves.
Bloodwing 5 Devils? Lu Chen thought for a moment and then nodded slowly and said, I've heard of these 5 people before. I heard that they have always been in the East Sea. Although their names also have the word devil in them, they had conflicts with the devil cult in the past and fought a few times. They have a very high reputation among the people. Because the 5 of them have high cultivation, they give the devil cult a headache. That's about it, Perfected Lord Tianlon said. Lu Chen looked at him and frowned. If that's the case, aren't these 5 people fine? Why would they? Perfected Lord Tianlon said lightly. Because our Zhengxian Meng's forces have expanded to the East Sea. He smiled and said to Lu Chen with a very amiable expression, Under our Zhengxian Meng, we don't allow such stubborn cultivators to exist. Lu Chen. All right. Perfected Lord Tianlon continued, Actually, these 5 people have had some achievements in their careers in the past. They are proud and arrogant, and because of their high cultivation and reputation, they don't think much of our Zhengxian Meng. So, at first we sent people to take them in but they refused. Left with no choice, we could only deal with them. You see, they are no match for us. Nonsense. Lu Chen rolled his eyes at this damn baldy and snappily said, Those 5 guys are at most Yuanying stage. Your Immortal Alliance has a lot of Yuanying stage cultivators and 6 soul formation perfected monarchs who stand at the peak of the cultivation world. Who the hell can beat you guys? Perfected Lord Tianlon was not angry at Lu Chen's sudden outburst of vulgarities.
Instead, the smile on his face deepened. He said with a smile, Well, although what you said is not pleasant to hear, it is the truth.
At that time, the old man Tai who was in charge of the overall situation in the East Sea.
I heard that under his command, the bloody-winged 5 devils suffered a lot, so they quieted down not long after.
Tai who? Lu Chen suddenly thought of something.
He frowned and said, Is it that perfected Lord Tai who from the Heavenly Law Hall?
Perfected Lord Tianlon nodded and said, That's him. Under the suppression of our Zhengxian Meng,
The bloody winged 5 devils are now beaten to the point that they can't fight back and are at their wits' end. However, recently, I suddenly received a secret letter from the Zhang and Rue devils. In the letter, the two of them expressed their intentions. They only said that they have never intended to be enemies with Zhengxian Meng, and that the enmity over the years is just a misunderstanding. They also said that they have not given up on their ambitions and still intend to serve Zhengxian Meng. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "They want to rely on us?" Perfected Lord Tianlong smiled and said, "Exactly. As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. There are still many smart people in this world. However, the troublesome thing is that the old man Tai who is strict and old-fashioned. After being in charge of the Heavenly Law Hall for many years, he has a bad temper and will not easily change his mind. Back then, the bloody winged 5 devils did not give him any face. Therefore, even if the 5 devils have expressed their intention to surrender and negotiate peace, when it comes to him, they still end up being chased by Zhengxian Meng and beaten half to death every day.
No wonder they came to look for you.
In this cultivation world, as long as Zhengxian Meng wants to suppress them, it will really be hard for them to continue living in this world." Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, "You only mentioned Zhang and Rue. What about the other 3 devils?" "This is the fun part." Perfected Lord Tianlong smiled and said, "Many years ago, the bloody winged 5 devils became sworn brothers with different surnames. They are said to be as close as brothers. They are determined to unite and rule the world and make great achievements. However, at this critical moment, the 5 of them originally agreed to retire and hide from the world when they saw that the overall situation was already out of control. Unexpectedly, the 2 of them came to look for me in secret. They said that they yearned for greater achievements and that their ambition for fame and glory had not given up. They were willing to serve me and begged me to take them in." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Do the other 3 devils know about this?"
"They probably don't know yet. That's about it."
Perfected Lord Tianlong flung his wide sleeves and said indifferently, "Help me plan how we should deal with this matter."
Lu Chen closed his eyes slightly and placed one hand on his thigh. His fingers moved slightly.
After a while, he opened his eyes and said to Perfected Lord Tianlong with a calm expression, "In my opinion, there are 2 important points in this matter." Perfected Lord Tianlong nodded and said, "Speak." Lu Chen said, "Firstly, Perfected Lord Tiehu is the person who is in charge of this matter on behalf of Zhengxian Meng after all. If we act rashly, will we anger him and face the retaliation of the other forces in the Immortal Alliance?" Perfected Lord Tianlong remained silent and only looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen continued, "Secondly, the bloody winged 5 devils have made great achievements in the past and have a high reputation among the people. If the Immortal Alliance oppresses them too much, there will be a lot of criticism." Perfected Lord Tianlong nodded and said, "So?" Lu Chen was silent for a while and said, "In my opinion, this matter should be done in 2 steps. Firstly, you only find someone to secretly spread Zhang and Rue's secret letter. Then, the other 3 devils will know that they have betrayed their brothers and there will be enmity between them. The brotherhood will never be complete and the name of the bloody winged 5 devils will naturally come to an end. The people in the world may think that we, Zhengxian Meng, are suppressing them, but at the same time, many people will definitely think that the 5 of them are fighting among themselves. At that time, there will be guesses, criticisms, insults, and disappointment. Everyone will be covered in dirty water and stink together. There will be no need to blame each other." Perfected Lord Tianlong pondered for a while and said with a smile, "This is a good plan, but it's a little sinister." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Thanks to you sending me to the devil cult when I was young, I learned these sinister skills and came back." Perfected Lord Tianlong laughed and said, "Very good, very good.
Come on, continue."
Lu Chen said again, "Since the brotherhood of the 5 devils is broken, they will lose the people's trust. Since the 5 brothers are split up, they can naturally be manipulated at will. If you see that they are still useful, you can step forward bravely at this time and announce to the world that the 2 devils Zhang and Rue have renounced darkness for light and are willing to die for the righteous path and righteousness of the common people in the world. You cherish talent and are willing to bear the crime of tarnishing your reputation. You should run around and call for them to be your subordinates. It will be a good show, like a hero rescuing a beauty, and your reputation in the cultivation world will soar." Perfected Lord Tianlong clapped and laughed. "Great plan! Great plan! However, people will probably see that they will bear the crime of being tarnished while we only benefit from it, right?" Lu Chen sneered and said,
There are so many people in the world. Even in the world of cultivation, there are still many idiots. Since you saved those people, there will naturally be people praising you as a great philanthropist. As for the other smart people who can see the truth, half of them will not ask for a rebuff and the other half will probably feel that it doesn't matter. Moreover, Lucien paused for a moment, and his expression seemed to be a little emotional. He clicked his tongue and sighed twice, then said indifferently, "With your status, power and reputation, even if some ants talk about you, how could you possibly care? Therefore, even though this plan is sinister and a little shameless, as long as you have the reputation and strength, you can naturally do whatever you want without any scruples. What do you think?" Lu Chen asked Perfected Lord Tianlan instead. Perfected Lord Tianlan retracted his smile and looked at Lu Chen. A moment later he said with a serious expression, "Indeed, I was right about you. You're born to be my successor." You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.